You've finally done it. After years of adding movies and shows to your queues, you've officially run out of things to watch on Netflix. You've also exhausted your entire backlog of books, and you've even run out of cereal boxes to read. So you're left roaming the streets in search of entertainment. That's when you see a worn-looking flyer stapled to a nearby telephone pole. It's an ad for a local community theater production of a play you've never heard of. A play called The Hanged King's Tragedy. Normally, you wouldn't think of yourself as much of a theater person, but something about the art on the poster grabs you. There's a strange figure on the poster, its face shrouded, its body wrapped in a web of chains. Your curiosity gets the better of you, and you check the performance date. To your pleasant surprise, opening night is a week from now, and you don't have anything planned. You've made up your mind. You're going to attend a live performance of The Hanged King's Tragedy. It's going to be the first live play you've ever seen, and little do you know, it may also be the last. Because The Hanged King's Tragedy isn't just any old play. It's a powerful and deadly mimetic hazard that may be one of the gateways to an even more dangerous being. It's known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-701, so take your seats. Be sure to read your programs thoroughly and prepare for the dark and terrifying tale of the Hanged King's Tragedy and the wave of death and destruction it causes in its theatrical wake. But how could you know any of this? While you head home to make dinner, looking forward to seeing the new play next week, the local thespians are hard at work performing dress rehearsals. The director, one Marcus Fitch, happened upon a copy of the play while looking for Carolinian theater that's a little more family-friendly than some of the Shakespearean classics. When he'd first discovered The Hanged King's Tragedy on a theatrical forum, it was described as being similar to Shakespeare's Hamlet and Titus Andronicus, but the violence was largely off-stage and implied, with a lot of the play's nastier elements glossed over, perfect for audience of all ages. Given the fact that performances of The Hanged King's Tragedy tend to be mass casualty events, for reasons you'll soon see, the Foundation does everything they can to control the spread of the play's script. All copies are kept in a triple-locked vault in a secure Foundation archive, which currently includes 2 copies of the original publication that are dated to the year 1640, 27 copies of the 1965 trade paperback edition, 10 copies of a 1971 hardcover printing, 21 floppy diskettes containing the play's script, and 1 SVHS videocassette tape containing a live taping of one particularly infamous incident. However, this seemingly does little to prevent new performances of The Hanged King's Tragedy from occurring. The text of the play continually pops up online, often under different or misspelled titles, preventing Foundation web crawlers from keeping track of them all. Nevertheless, the Foundation does everything in its power to detect and stop performances before they can go ahead. The danger of putting on or even viewing a performance of The Hanged King's Tragedy cannot be overstated. It's believed that, in the almost 300 years since its original publication, it's claimed 10,000 lives through performances at the very least. And if you're in attendance, dying quickly is one of the better outcomes. The origins of this mimetic virus are just as mysterious as the power that seems to drive its effects. The play never had a declared author, and the publisher, one William Cook, disappeared from all historical records after the play's publications. Performances have been varied over the 300 years the play has been active. It's been spotted everywhere from British university drama troupes to American high school plays. In what could have been an even more disastrous tragedy, a television adaptation of the play was almost broadcast by the BBC before the Foundation stepped in and put a stop to it. While its containment classification is currently Euclid, scientists who have studied the play have campaigned strongly to upgrade The Hanged King's Tragedy to Keter class, on account of its unpredictability and tendency to manifest across the globe, with incidences appearing decades apart. While members of the O5 Council are skeptical, some researchers even believe that given a wide enough exposure, The Hanged King's Tragedy could cause a dreaded XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. It is that dangerous. At this point, you're probably wondering, what exactly is The Hanged King's Tragedy? What's the play even about? As the name suggests, the play is a tragedy and takes place over 5 acts during the Carolinian era, portraying the drama of the royal court much like a number of plays from that time did. It takes place in the city of Serco, the capital of the mysterious fictional kingdom of Trinculo. The focal point of the play is the conflict between Gonzalo, the illegitimate king of Trinculo, and Antonio, the true heir to the throne. Before the start of the play, the previous king of Trinculo, King Sforza, had been betrayed and murdered by Gonzalo. Gonzalo led Sforza into the woods, where he and his men subdued the king and hanged him from a nearby tree like a common criminal. Hence the Hanged King's tragedy. However, Gonzalo is trying to keep his part in the king's murder a secret to keep the throne for himself, but his guilt-stricken wife Isabella threatens to spill the secret of Sforza's murder. While Antonio tries to uncover the truth of what happened in the woods, Gonzalo, in true Shakespearean villain style, plots further murders of his co-conspirators and loose ends to keep his dark secrets safe. This is where the play gets a little gruesome. One enemy, Gonzalo had killed and cooked into a stew. He then intends to use this stew to murder his entire court with the help of an effective and undetectable poison he was given by the mysterious ambassador of Alagada. Though you'll be pleased to know that this tragedy has somewhat of a happy ending. In the end, Gonzalo is exposed and Antonio claims his rightful place as king of Trinculo. Unlike his predecessor, Antonio decides to show mercy, and Gonzalo is exiled to a monastery for life rather than being executed for his murderous ways. The heroes are rewarded, the villains are punished, and all the deserving parties live happily ever after. At face value, nothing seems off about the play. If you're familiar with other works of the era, you might even find yourself getting bored while reading it. How can something this normal be the cursed play that claims so many thousands of lives? But this play's unassuming nature only serves to make it more dangerous. It doesn't appear that the mimetic hazard is caused by simply reading the play. Like all good theater, it only truly comes to life on stage. And your local production of the Hanged King's tragedy is no exception. As your community's amateur actors study and rehearse the play, making sure to commit every scene, every line, every single word to memory, they don't notice the little things that, to an outsider, might seem a little off. Occasionally during group dress rehearsals, actors will veer from the script. And we're not talking about flubbed lines or simple improvisation. No. Actors will at times seem like they're reading from a completely different script, and their fellow performers will respond in kind. The play lulls you into a false sense of security. Stagehands, crew members, even the director all believe they're performing the play exactly as it was originally written. Okay, so that's not so bad. A play that changes itself. But things are going to get worse from this point. Much, much worse. But hey, why let a deadly anomaly ruin your evening plans? You've been looking forward to seeing this play all week, and you couldn't seem to get that figure from the poster out of your mind. You have no idea that this entity is wanted by the SCP Foundation, and that its designation is SCP-701-1. All you want is an unforgettable theater experience, and you will certainly get one. It's a packed house. Not an empty seat in sight. The house lights dim and the curtain opens. Act 1 is quite normal, with all the backstabbing and royal court intrigue you'd expect. You actually feel yourself getting a little bored. A big yawn escapes your mouth. You're thinking that maybe this was a big mistake, and you might sneak out between acts, when just then, you see it. In the final scene of Act 1, you see the shrouded figure lingering in the background against the curtains. He seems so still, he's almost like a shadow. But as each act seems to run into the next, he becomes more prominent. The rest of the cast never acknowledges him as they deliver dramatic monologues, but he's always there. Finally, the play reached Act 5, the grand banquet scene where it all comes to head. Gonzalo is preparing to poison his dinner guests with his cannibal stew, while Antonio and his allies plot to reveal his terrible crimes and dethrone him. You find yourself so gripped by the drama of it all, you almost didn't notice that the shrouded figure of SCP-701-1 was standing right among the actors now. While unbeknownst to you, the actors have been deviating from the scripted story this whole time. Things are about to really take a turn for the horrific. SCP-701-1, who is now known to the other performers as the Hanged King, produces a blade from thin air and passes it to the actor playing Gonzalo's wife. The actors on stage suddenly become entranced. They attack and restrain Gonzalo, and a noose drops down from somewhere above the stage. The actors proceed to ritualistically hang Gonzalo before the actor playing his wife stabs him to death, all while chanting, "Blood for the Hanged King." You should be horrified, but you're not. You don't even feel like yourself anymore, and you're loving everything that's happening. On stage, a series of other nooses fall from above. Each actor grabs their own noose and the cast repeats "Blood for the Hanged King" before sacrificing their lives to the shroud-wearing monster. If the carnage stopped there, it would be bad enough. But this play doesn't just drive its players to acts of violent insanity, it pulls in the audience too. Before you know it, you're pulled into a vicious brawl with your fellow theatergoers. There's biting, clawing, punching, people hitting each other with chairs like it's a wrestling cage match. It's such a frenzy of random senseless violence that the building can't contain it anymore. You and anyone else who isn't dead already spilled out onto the streets and start attacking everyone you can get your hands on. It's transformed from a pleasant night out at the theater into a full-blown riot. Even the police, sent in to control the situation, are overwhelmed. It isn't until the SCP Foundation sends a number of mobile task forces trained in advanced crowd control that the situation finally begins to de-escalate. But you don't care. Even when large men in Foundation tactical gear are holding your arms, you still try to bite and kick. The effects of the play normally wear off after around 24 hours, but until then the infected, including you, are just rage-fueled monsters. In the end, it takes 4 adult men to properly restrain you. You'll feel the bruises from their nightsticks tomorrow, but now all you feel is hate and violence, and a single-minded devotion to something out there that you couldn't possibly comprehend. And the whole time you're screaming one thing over and over again: blood for the Hanged King. Very few people would enjoy getting eaten by a bear in the woods. That would undeniably be an extremely unpleasant thing to happen to anyone. Heck, it's certainly enough to put a damper on an otherwise fun weekend of camping. But the one consolation of undergoing such a tragedy is that you at least know nature is taking its course. After all, bears live in the woods, and if you decide to enter their turf, there's an unwritten agreement that you'll just accept the consequences if a bear decides it doesn't want your company. It's another thing entirely if a bear eats you in your bedroom in the middle of suburbia, miles away from any nearby forest. That's the unfortunate fate that befell little Tommy Ellis. His parents heard the bellowing roar of a bear upstairs, the floorboards creaking under its sudden weight. What was happening up there? They ran upstairs, following the sounds of the roars and Tommy's horrible screams. But by the time they reached the bedroom, it was already too late. The room was empty, torn apart from within as a 600-pound grizzly bear crawled its way out of the destroyed bedroom window. Tommy Ellis was never seen again. To Tommy's parents, before they were given amnestic treatment by agents of the SCP Foundation, it was a freakish one-off tragedy. But to those very same Foundation agents, it was just another instance in a series of deaths so strange and random that only some kind of anomalous serial killer could be behind it. 2 months earlier in a nearby town, a family had undergone a savage attack from a full-size male silverback gorilla. The huge and heavily territorial animal tore the house apart and beat anyone who tried to stop it into a pulp. Much like a bear attack, being killed by an aggressive gorilla in the wild isn't that strange, but being murdered by a gorilla in the suburbs of Cincinnati is definitely a cause for Foundation intervention. However, the gorilla killer was long gone before any Foundation agents were able to intervene. At first, it was assumed that they were dealing with some kind of animal SCP, but as more grisly murders occurred, it began to paint a better picture of what exactly was happening here. Next, a family was found dead after what had seemed to be a brutal attack with an edged weapon, but this was no mere knife. All the evidence pointed to the weapon being a sword. Neighbors interviewed by the Foundation about the attack before their amnestic treatment reported hearing a frightening ruckus coming from the house next door, including a deep male voice saying, "I have the power!" Much like He-Man from the popular toy and animation franchise. This reminded them of another recent murder case where the killer also reportedly used a sword, though this time more likely a Japanese katana than a European broadsword, and was heard yelling, "Cowabunga!" as they left the scene. As the bodies racked up, the evidence kept piling on. A young girl was traumatized by a naked man suddenly appearing in her bedroom. This would be horrible enough, but there were a few strange details. He was handsome, athletic, had bright blonde hair, and no genitals. In fact, he matched the exact description of a child's Ken doll. And the thing that finally tied this whole bizarre case together was an entire family who was found to have been killed by electrocution, despite all being in different rooms of the house at their time of death, and showing no evidence of having been moved post-mortem. But the family's youngest, Steven, had a number of Pokemon cards and action figures in his room, prominently featuring the franchise's most well-known creature, Pikachu. This shape-shifting, rampaging killer was caught not long afterwards when a full-size pony suddenly manifested in the home of another suburban family, thankfully causing no fatalities this time, and galloped off into the woods. Seeing as the Foundation was already keeping a close watch on the area to make sure they caught any more strange activity, they were able to quickly engage with and capture this strange entity. It was then sedated and sent back into containment at the iconic Site-19. The creature is now known as SCP-137. So you're probably wondering, what exactly is happening here? What are the anomalous traits of SCP-137 that appear to express themselves in such random and violent ways? Well, it may seem that 137's abilities are as diverse as they are dangerous. It actually only has one very simple anomalous power. It possesses the toys of children and transforms them into their real-life equivalent. A teddy bear became an actual bear. A stuffed gorilla became an actual gorilla. Toys of He-Man and a member of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles became murderous sword wielers. And Pikachu became a wild animal with powerful electrical abilities. The SCP doesn't appear to be inherently violent either. Its level of aggression appears to be in the eye of the beholder, as the attributes of the toys possessed by SCP-137 are defined by what a child perceives about said toy. For example, a pretend gun becomes a real one, capable of firing real bullets. Toys of dangerous animals become equally deadly in their real SCP-137 counterpart. Warriors and soldiers become powerful killing machines. However, this works both ways. Adorable or harmless characters remain equally adorable and harmless when SCP-137 possesses them. It seems as though the entity that possesses these toys doesn't even have a consciousness. It only takes up the mental attributes of its hosts. Incidentally, this was actually a crucial factor in devising the proper containment method for SCP-137 within Site-19. Through testing, the Foundation discovered that SCP-137's anomalous range is at least 250 meters, with a possible upper limit of 500 meters. In order to keep the creature in a consistent and harmless form, the Foundation forbids any unauthorized toy from being placed within the 500-meter radius of SCP-137. Essentially, the Foundation has boxed SCP-137 into a corner, meaning that any toy placed within its anomalous proximity is its only option. In this case, the Foundation has locked SCP-137 into a form of a wholesome princess doll, identifying itself as Princess Blossom. When asked about its identity in this form, the creature seems to have no awareness whatsoever of its anomalous nature. SCP-137 truly believes it is Princess Blossom while occupying this form, repeatedly asking interviewing researchers whether they're her prince finally coming to save her from this prison. Sadly for 137, her prince will never come, but perhaps she'll spend every day looking at her own cell door and hoping, being physically incapable of knowing any better. But of course, you're not here to engage with the heady existential realities of a shape and personality shifting anomaly. Like any reasonable person in this situation, of course, you want to hear about the experiment logs and find out just how far this entity's ability to anomalously take the forms of living toys can stretch. And don't worry, we won't disappoint you on that one either. SCP-137 has some of the most insane testing logs we've ever seen, and we're going to share them with you right now. The last one is a real doozy. First, overeager researchers made the terrible decision to introduce a toy plane into the testing chamber with SCP-137. How could this possibly go wrong, right? Well, here's how. The toy plane was possessed by SCP-137, which transformed into a full-sized F-16 jet. This jet then attempted to fly off while inside the testing chamber, resulting in it flying into the side of the chamber and exploding, causing a massive amount of damage to Foundation property. Whenever one of SCP-137's toy hosts is destroyed, it returns to being a toy. In this case, after the smoke cleared, a small cluster of broken plastic was laying on the floor. The researchers were then forbidden from testing any toys with jet engines or missiles, but they didn't tell them anything about toy race cars. It seemed these researchers really were children at heart. They were amazed when the toy car turned into a full-size Ferrari, then plowed into the wall at high speeds, exploding. Vehicle tests were suspended after this. The next test was actually kind of an accident. An attending agent had an amusing little keyring shaped like an alligator when entering the 250-meter range of SCP-137. You can probably guess what happened next. Because the keyring was technically close enough to a toy, SCP-137 took it over and transformed it into a 6-meter-long saltwater crocodile. It then lashed out, attacking and devouring nearby researchers. 14 were dead by the time Foundation security officers managed to safely enter the scene and terminate the crocodile. At that point, searches were intensified for all personnel intended on working in SCP-137's 500-meter danger zone. Next, an action figure of an American soldier, complete with a toy rifle. What do you think happened next? If you're guessing that this toy became a violent, full-size soldier that then went on to murder a number of Foundation employees before being taken out by several Foundation agents, then you can take any prize from the middle shelf. Just make sure you don't bring your prize too close to SCP-137, or disaster could strike again. After this, a toy police officer was possessed by SCP-137. He began by searching the testing facility for perps and encouraging the researchers to stay away from drugs. This seemed almost charming to begin with, until he pulled out his gun and murdered 2 researchers claiming they were criminals. He handcuffed a third before finally being terminated by Foundation security officers. After this, researchers on the SCP-137 project decided to veer away from testing on violent or dangerous toys, and instead brought in a stuffed panda, the sweetest and cuddliest of all bears. Everyone agreed that this would be a pleasant change when SCP-137 transformed into one of the big adorable beasts. One researcher, overjoyed at the presence of the panda, accepted a hug from it. The panda hugged far harder than anticipated, breaking 3 of the researchers' ribs. It was terminated by Foundation security officers soon afterwards. It turned out that the anomalous effects of SCP-137 also applied to non-sentient toys. For example, a box filled with Lego blocks became real terracotta bricks and construction materials. And a yo-yo, even when placed on a hook on the wall with nobody nearby, continued to perform sick yo-yo tricks with reckless abandon. The penultimate test performed on SCP-137 involved an action figure of a character known as Dr. Selenium, advertised as the smartest man on Earth. However, when SCP-137 transformed this into a real-life Dr. Selenium, the Foundation discovered that SCP-137 couldn't actually imitate more ephemeral qualities like incredible intelligence. This Dr. Selenium clone simply walked around, constantly talking about how intelligent he was rather than actually demonstrating that intelligence. He was probably the kind of guy who comments first on YouTube videos. And finally, the strangest test of all. The Foundation constantly needs to worry about moles and double-crossers in their midst. They have tests to figure out the presence of double agents working for groups of interest, like the Chaos Insurgency or the Serpent's Hand. But one group that they didn't have tests for were bronies, adult male fans of the cartoon My Little Pony based on the popular toy series. And it just so happened that one of the researchers on the SCP-137 case was indeed a brony. That's why he snuck a doll of the purple pony Twilight Sparkle into the testing chamber, causing SCP-137 to possess it and turn into the real thing. He engaged in a somewhat flirtatious conversation with the talking pony, leading to the pony offering to take the researcher back to her castle so they could hang out. After the testing session ended, the researcher was removed from the project and then reprimanded by his superiors for using an anomaly to fulfill his personal interests. But working at the Foundation is an incredibly hard job, with the risk of death lurking around every corner. So who can really blame a guy for wanting to hang out with his favorite cartoon character between sessions with 096 and 682? On April 16, 1999, the Raleigh Ripper was finally brought to justice after a reign of terror across the state of North Carolina that left 14 women dead. The killer's true identity had been Kevin Gruber, a local gas station attendant originally from West Virginia, who was arrested at work in the early hours of the morning. His face was plastered all over the media when he was cuffed and dragged in to be questioned and processed. Like many serial killers, the most frightening thing about Kevin was the fact that he just seemed so normal. The idea that a person like this could have committed the atrocities of the Raleigh Ripper raised a frightening question we all need to contend with. What turns a person into a monster? This question was particularly prescient for Dr. James Whittington, a criminal psychologist tasked with conducting the first official psychological evaluation on Gruber. Ever since the true identity of the killer had come to light, the case had held a particular fascination for him, mainly because Gruber the man and Gruber the killer seemed to almost be two entirely separate people. According to all evidence, the Raleigh Ripper was an insidious, methodical criminal genius. He'd stalk some of his victims, all women who lived alone, for weeks before striking, conducting detailed surveillance of their homes that allowed him to isolate them, bypass their security systems, and remove any means of getting help. He blocked doors, cut phone lines, and always selected vulnerable targets. Despite being a seasoned criminal psychologist, the actual details of Gruber's crimes had kept Whittington awake at night. He had a wife and a young son at home, and the thought of a man like Gruber prowling out there made him fear for both of them. This was no thrill killer. He was a sadistic torturer who seemed to delight in the pain and terror of his prey. He'd chosen victims he could take his time with, infiltrated their homes like a gust of cold air through an open window, and slipped out through darkness like a shadow. Perfectly controlled crime scenes, no stray evidence, nothing but death left behind. For months, he'd run circles around the police. Thousands of people who fit the Raleigh Ripper profile were interviewed. Sting operations were conducted. Communities formed neighborhood watches to keep each other safe from the killer's next move. And none of it did any good. From seasoned detectives to legions of beat cops, nobody could get the jump on Kevin Gruber. The fact he was even caught came out of pure chance. A local hiker, Mike Fletcher, just so happened to hear the screaming coming from a nearby home in the woods and made the heroic decision to run in and intervene. When he walked in on Gruber committing the attack, the killer panicked and fled through an open window. In his haste, he'd left a partial print on the window frame. That, combined with Mike's description of the assailant, was enough to finally link Kevin to the 14 murders of the Raleigh Ripper. The problem, from Dr. Whittington's perspective, was that by all accounts, Kevin Gruber seemed to be an idiot. This was no suave, charismatic Ted Bundy type. In all the prior photos and interviews, Kevin had that deer-in-the-headlights look of a man who's just in way over his head. Dr. Whittington had also pored over Kevin's school records. The only thing he seemed to excel at was being mediocre. He even got held back a year in 5th grade. Since graduating high school, he'd been kicked out by his parents for freeloading and hadn't been able to consistently hold down a job for more than 8 months. His only prior criminal convictions had been one drunk and disorderly conduct charge and possession of an ounce of pot back in 1991, for which he got a suspended sentence due to being a minor at the time. It just didn't make sense to Dr. Whittington that this man and the diabolically brilliant Raleigh Ripper were the same person, despite all the incontrovertible evidence proving it so. Despite his reservations, he needed to meet this man, and find out why and how he committed all these horrific murders, despite being such an unremarkable individual. Sitting across from Gruber in the secure interview chamber, Whittington was once again struck with how incredibly disappointing he was. Thin and wiry, with glazed-over eyes, messy hair, and a pathetic tuft of weak stubble on his chin, he looked more like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo than a cold-blooded killer. His answers to most of Dr. Whittington's questions were also insubstantial, with him often losing his train of thought, or even needing to ask the psychologist to carefully explain the question to him. Most of the time, Gruber tried to make irritating slow-motion small talk, concerning everything from the weather to movies he enjoyed. The interview had been utterly worthless. Until 4 hours in, Gruber mentioned something that awakened a strange memory in Dr. Whittington. He said, "Hey, say Doc, you remember that TV show Bobble the Clown? I loved that show as a kid. It was like my religion. Your kid ever watch it?" There were a number of unsettling things about this. From the fact that for some reason Dr. Whittington could remember something about Bobble the Clown, to the fact that Kevin Gruber had no way of knowing that Dr. Whittington even had a kid. But still, he didn't let his concern show, and instead asked Gruber what he remembered about Bobble the Clown. Gruber smiled and replied, "Oh, Bobble taught me everything I know, Doc." To which Dr. Whittington asked the million-dollar question, "Like what, Kevin?" Gruber shrugged and just said, "All kinds of stuff, Doc. Like how to watch without being seen, how to Jimmy open a window without making a sound, how to make him hurt real bad without him dying, so you can even make it last longer, so it can be more fun. And of course, he taught me to get out without leaving anything behind. Well, Bobble made this all possible, Doc, and he told me all about you too, that all this was gonna happen someday. All good things have to come to an end eventually, right? Tell the wife and kid he says hi, by the way." Dr. Whittington was astounded. Gruber seemed to stare vacantly off into space for a moment, before suddenly claiming that he had a terrible headache, and he needed to go back to his cell. In any other situation, Whittington might have just written off Bobble the Clown as one of two things: a psychotic delusion or a sophisticated psychopath faking a psychotic delusion in hopes of getting the insanity plea. Like the Son of Sam killer, David Berkowitz, pretending a demonic talking dog possessed by Satan made him commit all of his murders. But Whittington had heard of this Bobble the Clown before, and it wasn't in a scenario that a gas station clerk like Kevin Gruber ever would have heard of. It took half a day of research into his own archived notes to remember exactly where he'd heard it before. A child he'd interviewed almost a decade ago, who shoved gasoline and fireworks through the letterbox of an old woman's home, leading to a fire that left the woman and her dog dead. When Dr. Whittington interviewed the crying child about his motives, he'd said that it wasn't his fault. Bobble the Clown had told him to do it on the TV. Given that there were no records of a Bobble the Clown show ever airing on any local networks, Whittington had written it off at the time as the overactive imagination of a very frightened, very disturbed young child. That same child would later go into psychiatric care before reoffending as a serial arsonist upon release. The last building he ever burned down had only one occupant: himself. Fire investigators would later state that he had just sat there, legs crossed, placidly waiting for the flames to lick his bones clean. It was becoming incredibly clear that this Bobble the Clown fantasy, if it were even a fantasy at all, seemed to be much more than an isolated phenomenon. He used his credentials to start exploring other strange crimes of passion committed by children and young adults, even asking some of his friends in the criminal psychology community, off the record, if they'd ever heard of such a concept before. Frighteningly, it didn't take Dr. Whittington very long at all to hit pay dirt. There was the case of the Orfeo family murders in 1985 out in Arkansas. 9-year-old Donnie Orfeo had taken his dad's rifle out of the cabinet in the dead of night and walked room to room shooting his mother, father, and 2 older sisters in their beds. Neighbors had heard the gunshots and called the police. By the time they arrived at the scene, the only survivor was Donnie Orfeo himself, drenched in blood sitting in front of the TV. His hollow eyes stared zombie-like into the static. He did not resist arrest. When Donnie was taken in for questioning, his emotional responses were cold and flat. When he was asked why he murdered his family, he said that it was because his father told him he was watching too much TV. His favorite TV character, Bobble the Clown, had told him that if he murdered his family with Daddy's gun, he could watch as much TV as he liked. Just reading this, Dr. Whittington could feel sweat beading on his brow. 2 cases were a coincidence, but 3 were a pattern. And oh, how he wished it had stopped at just 3. From 4 days of searching, he discovered no fewer than 17 different seemingly isolated crimes with mentions of Bobble the Clown attached to the file. A 5-year-old boy from New Jersey who drowned his neighbor's cat in a river with a gym bag full of heavy stones told police that he'd learned the technique from Bobble the Clown. An 8-year-old girl, arrested for tying up and torturing her sister with a rusty coat hanger in Texas, had, of course, gotten the idea from watching an episode of Bobble the Clown. Murder, assault, vandalism, torture, an extensive countrywide rap sheet all led back to that one recurring factor. They all learned it from watching Bobble the Clown. Dr. Whittington had gotten in contact with a few friends who knew people in broadcasting. While carefully omitting some of the grislier details, he implored them for any new information on whether a TV show with Bobble the Clown had ever gone out anywhere. But despite their best efforts, they didn't find any records of Bobble the Clown or any similar educational clown shows airing. Was it possibly some complex shared hallucination? Dr. Whittington simultaneously felt burdened by all this terrifying knowledge and utterly powerless to do anything useful with it. If he started blowing the whistle to the media or his superiors that a spat of horrible crimes were all being caused by a violent imaginary clown, he'd just look as deranged as any of the people he'd been studying. There seemed to be nothing he could do to stop or help any of this. He returned home that night with a heavy heart, hanging up his coat. He needed someone to talk to about all this, but he couldn't burden his wife with the horrors he encountered daily on the job, much less a living nightmare like this mysterious Bobble the Clown. As he walked towards the kitchen to pour himself a stiff drink, he heard strange, jaunty music coming from the living room. He stepped back and saw his 7-year-old son Ben watching something on TV. As he stepped closer, he could scarcely believe his eyes. Ben, entranced, eyes fixed on a dancing, grinning, animated clown on the screen. Ben slowly turned his head towards Dr. Whittington, eyes wide and bulging, and said, "I've been waiting for you to get home, Daddy." Bobble said he got tired of playing with Kevin. He wants to play with us now. Dr. Whittington turned and looked at the clown on the screen again. He could swear it was smiling right at him. That was the last thing he remembered before the sudden, intense headache and the ground standing up to embrace him. When he woke up, he was in bed with his wife, and neither of them could move, thanks to the heavy ropes binding their body to the frame. Bobble is very good at teaching children to tie knots. They tried to scream, but a shiny flash of duct tape held both of their mouths closed. Dr. Whittington's eyes swiveled in his head to Ben, standing at his bedside. The boy was holding a kitchen knife, and he was very eager to show his mom and dad the fun new trick Bobble the Clown had taught him. To the SCP Foundation, this terrifying anomalous TV show is known as SCP-993, known to cause blackouts in adults and violent antisocial behavior in children. They do their best to keep the broadcasts contained, but if ever a child in your life seems to be acting strangely, perhaps ask yourself very carefully what they're watching when you're not around. The Gofford Theater is silent, save for the occasional shifting of your fellow Foundation researcher. The two of you are alone, and you've been tasked with transcribing the performance of SCP-6373. You read the file, understood the briefing, and you even told yourself that you're prepared to witness whatever obscene show is about to commence. But you've never experienced SCP-6373 firsthand. This is your first time, filling in for another researcher who got herself injured during one of the performances. You hope it wasn't anything serious. The lights flash, pointing to the main stage. The smell of rot is almost overwhelming now. You swear you see a family of rats scurry under your front row seats. The curtains fly open, revealing nothing. You expect someone to come out from behind the curtain, but the stage is barren. Suddenly, a loud creaking noise is heard from above, and 4 broken, poorly painted, and utterly deranged-looking puppets drop from the ceiling. Their strings are slightly visible, and their movements fluctuate between quick, jerky motions and slow, weighty ones. The one with the long nose starts talking in a high-pitched, lofty voice, asking the desolate audience if they're ready for the show. You start to wonder when things are going to kick in and really cement this anomaly's status as a terrifying SCP object. For the first 5 minutes, the show isn't too bad. The puppets sing and dance a bit creepy, but they're not doing anything wrong. At least, that's what you think. Until the long-nosed one brandishes a baseball bat and savagely smashes the smaller round one to a pulp, splattering guts and insides all over the theater. And it only gets worse from there. Welcome to the Gofford Theater, the home of SCP-6373, codenamed by those researching it as Stage Blight. SCP-6373 refers to a collection of 4 papier-mâché puppets, each standing around 1 meter in height and complete with attached strings. These puppets constantly emit a rotting, disgusting stench, though the Foundation has come to the conclusion that this smell is entirely non-anomalous. SCP-6373 gain their anomalous properties at around 6 p.m. each day, as long as they're positioned inside the Gofford Theater, a building located in the city of Reading, Pennsylvania, which is where the Foundation has chosen to contain the 4 objects. If SCP-6373 aren't inside the Gofford Theater, they instead start decomposing, rotting and breaking down into a stinky, smelly mess of puppet materials. So what happens when SCP-6373 takes on their anomalous properties? The puppets gain sentience, mobility, and limited intelligence, though attempts to communicate with SCP-6373 outside of their performances have failed. Sorry, no puppet interview logs for today. They then proceed to the main stage of the Gofford Theater and put on a puppet show. Wow, a whole performance. Isn't that sweet? Not really. SCP-6373's performances are notoriously brutal, unpredictable, and terrifying. So much so that the Foundation has offered counseling services to the poor personnel forced to watch them. That's right, there must be at least one observing personnel in the Gofford Theater to witness SCP-6373's performance, or else the puppets drop to the floor and start decomposing again. Following their performance, the puppets lose all sentience until 6 p.m. on the next day, where the process repeats. But let's talk about SCP-6373 themselves. These puppets have a lot of character. You have Pierre, SCP-6373-1, the main character of the performances, who just loves to verbally and physically abuse his fellow wooden companions. Gluton, SCP-6373-2, is a large disembodied head with a gaping mouth who speaks only in single-word statements and deep, guttural moans. SCP-6373-3 is a tiny gray round ball known as Emi, who remains entirely silent throughout the performances, despite being the puppet abused by the others the most frequently. The puppet SCP-6373-4, Jacques, is a long-necked clown who serves as the group's comedic relief. But before we delve into the horrific performances put on by these entities, let's talk about the Gofford Theater. The theater was opened in 1860 by French immigrant Timothée Gofford for the purposes of putting on stage plays, musical performances, and in-house puppet shows that feature SCP-6373. The puppets were designed by Gofford himself and were massively profitable and popular with Reading's children. While it's not known if SCP-6373 possessed their anomalous properties during the original run of performances, the Foundation doesn't believe they did, and they were otherwise ordinary puppets controlled by puppeteers. Unfortunately, the Gofford Theater was not built to last. In 1884, it closed its doors after a legal battle between Gofford and his wife. Cynthia raged through the courts. Cynthia was accused of stealing money from the theater, to which she defended herself, saying that Timothy was not only unfaithful in their marriage, but also physically and verbally abusive to her. The lawsuit ended in a divorce and an ominously worded letter written to Cynthia by Timothy.
I write to you in poor health, and all joy sapped from my life. May misfortune follow you until the end of your days. I will not construct again that which I had spent 2 decades of my life working towards. I can only thank God's grace that the building has remained vacant, as I could not bear to see it owned by another man. I want to perform again and see the children smile. My happiness was so linked to theirs.
A week later, Timothy Gofford disappeared entirely. 4 months later, Cynthia Gofford supposedly died of natural causes. In 1887, Foundation precursor organization the American Secure Containment Initiative, or ASCI for short, discovered SCP-6373 inside the theater and documented its anomalous properties shortly after. SCP-6373 had a captive audience, and containment persisted long after the ASCI had assimilated into the SCP Foundation. And now we can get to the part you've all been waiting for, the performances themselves. The Foundation has kept a log of all of SCP-6373's performances, but here are some of the most notable ones. SCP-6373's first performance in 1887 involved lighting fixtures around the theater collectively powering on several minutes before the show, as well as a slight piano accompaniment, originating from an unknown source. The contents of the show were simple. Pierre rescued a princess, a costume Jacques, from a dragon played by Gluten. Researchers noted several moments where one of the puppets had difficulty maintaining posture and moving, often taking multiple attempts to lift limbs. These moments increased in frequency over time. In 1895, the puppets performed a show about a bank robbery gone wrong. Pierre decided that Aimé was the one who alerted the police about their crime and spent the rest of the performance berating and abusing the small puppet, specifically for betraying its trust and breaking the bond they had shared after years of working together, as Pierre put it. The puppets use Aimé as a soccer ball, but their game quickly devolves into a contest of trying to see who can kick it the hardest. Aimé is noted to be silently crying throughout all of this. In 1916, the puppets put on a World War I period piece, taking place on a farm owned by husband Pierre and his wife Aimé. Pierre, upset that his crops were destroyed by the ongoing war, asks Aimé for support, but the puppet remains silent, even as Pierre's cries grow louder and more frantic. Pierre then shifts the blame of the crop's destruction from the war to Aimé itself. He states that Aimé will never be let out of the house again. Sounds of war and human suffering were heard throughout. In 1922, the puppets repeated their first performance about the princess and the castle. Except this time, the puppets sounded a lot angrier in their dialogue delivery, and their movements are described as frantic bursts in between moments where they do nothing but hang limp. Pierre yells at Gluten for an apparently poor performance as the princess, and when the puppet pretends to play dead, Pierre specifically states that that's not what being dead feels like. In 1938, the puppets attempted to perform a comedy routine, but quickly found out that their slow, unsynchronized movements were causing problems with the pacing and effectiveness of their act. Pierre became frustrated and brandished a prop fire hose, which he sprayed at the fellow puppets, causing them to scream as their paint ran off and chipped. Their screams heard throughout the theater were notably feminine. In 1952, Pierre performed a piano duet with Jacques, who was unable to sit still or keep quiet during the act. The annoyed Pierre proceeded to savagely slam Jacques' head into the piano until it was dented, and his jaw was detached completely. The Jacques puppet began leaking a disgusting yellow fluid from its mouth. Pierre fetched Aimé and forced the tiny puppet to sit in the fluid, all while Jacques writhed in pain.
While the damage sustained by the puppets during each performance was healed and restored by the next day through anomalous means, Jacques' jaw was never fixed, and he continued to seep fluid for the duration of the anomaly's containment.
1958's performance was only 2 minutes in length and featured Pierre attempting to teach an art class. Gluten's canvas displayed the words, "Open inside," which for some reason angered Pierre enough to end the performance entirely and lead the puppets off stage. For the next 24 hours, an unidentified male voice screamed and swore from behind the stage's curtain, throwing objects and punching walls. The source was not discerned, and no SCP-6373 instances could be found within the theater until the next day at 6 p.m., when they re-emerged from the back and performed as usual. This 1963 performance was particularly bizarre. Pierre took the stage by himself and proceeded to deliver a eulogy for Timothy Gofford in the voice of an unidentified woman. Strangely, the Foundation discovered that a funeral service was not held for Gofford. In 1971, the puppets' performances became a lot more lifeless. Their voices became monotone, and their movements were slower. Oftentimes, a puppet would have to hit itself in order to restore fluid motion to its limbs. This would continue in all future performances. In 1973, SCP-6373 performed a sitcom skit in which Pierre and his two sons, played by Jacques and Gluton, took turns beating and breaking Aimé. This trend of physical abuse towards Aimé would increase in frequency as time went on, like in this 4-hour 1976 performance that consisted of the silhouette of the puppets from behind the stage, torturing the poor thing, all while Aimé silently took it. All the while, Pierre told Aimé that it was the sole reason the puppets were in their current situation, and why they were unable to move forward. In 1979, the Gofford's Theater's structural integrity was observed to be failing. Masses of rats, termites, and fungi were discovered throughout the building. Similarly, the performances themselves became even more disturbing. One involved the puppets reenacting the life story of Timothy Gofford, but refused to acknowledge or mention his wife, Cynthia. Instead, they claimed he died alone and miserable, without ever experiencing love. The performance ended with Pierre smashing its head against the floor and knocking it off. Unleashing a swarm of blowfly larvae the Foundation was unable to remove from the theater. In 1983, the puppets performed a skit in which they held a funeral for Aimé. After exploring a variety of possible afterlives from various religions, the puppets were understandably confused about which one was correct and how they could achieve salvation. Then Jacques has an epiphany, exclaiming,
I know the answer. We're all dead. This is the only afterlife there is.
The puppets then went limp and stayed there for a week. By 1984, the puppets put almost zero effort into their performances. One involved them openly fantasizing about injuring the audience members, and ended with the puppets picking a poor Foundation researcher from the audience as a volunteer and snapping her arm, all while laughing. Another had the puppets stating the full names, birthdays, and death dates of every patron of the Gofford Theater, from its opening to the present, and this included the Foundation researchers watching. SCP-6373's movements were awkward and slow, their speech slurred. It was clear that the puppets were on their last limb. In 1985, every performance had degenerated to a frenzy of self-harm carried out by the puppet, devoid of any stage lighting and accompanied by a noisy, barely harmonious musical accompaniment. Feminine screams and male laughter is heard throughout. But things got even worse throughout the year, as performances further degraded to periods of sitting or standing still and incoherent rambling while facing the audience. The performances were entirely indecipherable, and all dialogue consisted of grunting, moaning, screaming, and weeping. On June 6, 1985, SCP-6373 put on another performance. The puppets stood side by side for 18 minutes, before bowing and falling to the ground. No lights or music was heard. Following this performance, the puppets began to decay, shedding their papier-mâché exteriors. When this was complete, the insides of the puppets were revealed to be composed of human remains and organs. Pierre contained a brain, Jacques a heart, Gluton a mass of skin and tissue, and Aimé was empty. All of this material had been cut cleanly and sourced from a single individual. When the Foundation unrolled the skin tissue contained inside the gluten puppet, there was no doubt about which individual it resembled. Cynthia Cordier, the wife of Timothy Gofford. The object was reclassified as neutralized, and no further performances or anomalous activity relating to SCP-6373 was ever observed.
Roll up, come one and all. The circus is in town, and not just any circus. The greatest show in all the multiverse. Don't pay attention to the fact that the tents weren't here yesterday, or that you don't remember hearing anything about it before now. That's just the circus magic at work. And there's no circus more magical or more mysterious than Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting. It's a show so marvelous that even the SCP Foundation wants to get in on the act. So come watch the show, come feel the magic. After all,
What do you have to lose? The story of this humbling traveling show begins in 1893 with the founder Herman S. Fuller. He was born into a wealthy family, and at the age of 21, he was invited by his uncle to Chicago to see the buildings his company had constructed for the World's Fair. He was dazzled by the sights he saw in the Windy City, and from then on he dedicated his life to finding a way to bring that same awe to people across America, and eventually, the world. After receiving a small loan from his uncle, Herman Fuller set about building the miraculous circus you see before you today. He knew he had to get a leg up over his competitors. After all, the 1890s were a golden age for traveling shows in America. So Herman devoted his time to research, trying to find acts and oddities that were truly out of this world. He learned the way between worlds, stole books from the Wanderer's Library, and with them studied alchemy, transmutation, sarcasm, and other supernatural disciplines. That real magic and touch of the macabre would be what made Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting so special, and would ultimately give it its longevity. Herman Fuller's first anomalous acquisition was a genuine Fiji mermaid, like the one that famed showman P.T. Barnum kept on display around the same time period. Unlike Barnum's, however, Fuller's mermaid had been brought to life. The crowds loved it, but like all attractions, pretty soon crowds grew bored of it and hungered for the next strange sight. So Fuller went about acquiring more curiosities. His next important acquisition was the man with the upside-down face, or Manny for short. He serves as second in command to the ringmaster and manages things behind the scenes, including the acquisition of new talent. Many other anomalous beings and items were purchased for the circus by Fuller through the auction company known as Marshall, Carter & Dark, another group that the SCP Foundation makes a habit of keeping tabs on. Another thing that sets this circus apart from any others is the clowns, because they aren't like any you've seen before. Though Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting employs professional clowns, the vast majority of the clown troupe are non-human descendants of an extra-dimensional race of magical shapeshifters. Nobody really knows why they decided to come to our reality and help Herman Fuller set up his circus, but the leading theory is simply that they were bored. These original clowns are the progenitors of the turn clowns and the bread clowns. Turn clowns being humans who underwent a clown transformation procedure, and the bread clowns being artificially grown children produced by the other two types. Earlier in the circus's history, before we knew what we know today about genetics, much more barbaric methods were used to create new clowns. Young human subjects would be subjected to beatings and painful transfigurations at the hands of the circus's child breaker. These days, however, the circus no longer employs a child breaker. Instead, the creation of new clowns is the responsibility of resident clown breeder, Richard C. Normus. And before you say anything, don't laugh. That is his real name. Some of the most famous clowns in the troupe are Eugene and Pius, both of which are original clowns. Mr. Noodles, who is a bread clown, and Icky the troupe leader, who was once a human with magical abilities known as Veronica Mason. She still possesses her anomalous powers as Icky, and her magic act is one of the most beloved parts of our show. After the sudden disappearance of Herman Fuller, Icky inherited his position as ringmaster and has been doing a spectacular job ever since. Not every attempt to create new clowns has been successful as Icky and Mr. Noodles, though. Some of the earlier attempts were quite grotesque to look at. Herman Fuller's troupe of clowns are an enthusiastic, happy-go-lucky, but occasionally violent bunch, capable of minor feats of reality bending that allow them to perform all manner of tricks. They live on a diet of mostly sugar and need to be milked regularly. Clown milk is an invaluable substance here at the circus, as it's the secret ingredient of the famous black cotton candy, which, by the way, is free with admission. It causes the brain to produce high levels of serotonin, meaning that when you eat it, you're primed to have a great time. Be careful though. Raw, concentrated clown milk is not for human consumption. Though the clowns love to drink it, even a small amount can cause a human to go into cardiac arrest due to an overload of happiness. The sound of calliope music also goes a long way to helping people truly get the most out of their visit to Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting. The calliope is self-playing and requires rolls of perforated paper to be loaded into it so that it can play a variety of pre-programmed pieces of music. Each piece produces a different psychological effect on visitors who have consumed their cotton candy. The skater's waltz will make them accept whatever they see at the circus, no matter how weird, as nothing out of the ordinary. Wonderful for making sure nobody blabs about their experience to a certain pesky foundation. Officer of the Year makes them less likely to perceive an event as unlawful. We use that one when we suspect the cops are closing in. Hail, hail, the gang's all here is used to get people to congregate at the big top for showtime. And American Patrol causes those who have eaten their cotton candy to seek out those who haven't, in order to strongly encourage them to have some. What do you mean you lost your dog is one that gets played after hours, when it's time to get the clowns ready for milking. Now that you have an idea of the history and how things work around the circus, it's time for the tour. The circus is made up of a series of tents and trailers, as well as a midway with standard rides and games that you might find at any circus. Outside of the big top, where shows are performed once a day, there's also the Den of Freaks and the Hall of Humans Extraordinaire. The Den of Freaks is home to fantastic acts like Sluggo and Eliza the Living Head. Sluggo is a man whose eyes are on stalks like those of a slug, and he can bend those stalks into any shape he wishes. He can even use them to create the shapes of human faces. Eliza the Living Head is a woman whose head lives independently of her body, which is safely kept in storage. Even without her body, she can speak and sing and often answers questions from the audience. The Hall of Humans Extraordinaire is home to performers who lack physical anomalies, but otherwise display otherworldly talents like the amazing Zoltan, a fortune teller and alchemist who Fuller picked up at a place called the Utterly Bizarre. The Hall of Humans Extraordinaire also used to be home to Icky the Clown, back when she was still Veronica the Magician. The recent lineup has changed quite a bit thanks mainly to the activities of the circus's constant enemy. You guessed it, the SCP Foundation. Or as they are better known to the stable of interdimensional clowns as the Miss SCP Foundation. The Foundation does not appear to be a fan of circus folk, and many of the former acts are now in their containment. For example, Madame Rezarta and her amazing palm reader, also known as SCP-1884-A and SCP-1884-B. Madame Rezarta was a blind Albanian woman in her 60s who was born without hands. She shared a psychic link with a creature named Luana, who was a large, shapeless entity made up of 932 hands. 929 of these hands appear to be those of an old woman and share Madame Rezarta's DNA, but the remaining 3 hands seem to be from a male Caucasian adolescent, an adult Hispanic female, and a Bengal tiger. Through her psychic link, Luana acted as Madame Rezarta's eyes, feeling its surroundings to provide her with a mental map. Fuller attempted to buy the 2 of them when they were 8 years old, but when their parents refused, he sent Manny to whisk them away under the cover of darkness. Madame Rezarta's act involved sending Luana to feel the faces of audience members, and then trying to describe their appearance based on what Luana felt. The act was a hit, but Madame Rezarta claimed to have been horribly abused during her time with Herman Fuller. The 2 of them escaped while on tour and were picked up by old SCP while trying to rent a hotel room in the UAE. Then there's Virtuoso, also known as SCP-1860. Virtuoso was once a book of sheet music that was transfigured by Herman Fuller into one of the circus's original acts. It's a tall, thin humanoid being encased in a densely woven paper-based material that stretches like nylon or spandex. It constantly drips black ink which it has a telekinetic control over. It uses the ink to create the shapes of musical notes, which float around it while it sings. Virtuoso can sing in multiple voices at once across different vocal ranges, and constantly performs arias and show tunes for whoever is listening. It was recovered from underneath a burnt-down shack at a fairground where the circus had been set up earlier. In containment, Virtuoso still sings,
but translations from Italian reveal that the lyrics of the arias it's singing have been changed to reflect its own situation. Some of these translated lyrics include, "One day I'll tell you of my creation and life within the circus, born from the ringmaster, his breed." Another act the circus dearly misses is Motormouth, also known as SCP-2094. He was one of the rare human clowns born in New York City in the late 70s. From birth, he displayed a supernatural level of flexibility in his lower jaw, and as he grew older, he discovered that he could swallow large objects and store them in a kind of pocket dimension until he needed them again. Unlike Madame Rezarta, he went with Manny willingly, as even at 8 years old, he knew that his alcoholic mother didn't care if he lived or died. Motormouth took to the circus like a fish to water, and grew from a shy child into a very talented, talkative, and highly charismatic adult. He was a juggler first and foremost, who would catch pins, balls, and knives in his mouth as part of his routine. But the name Motormouth came later in his career when he let a stunt driver drive a car off a ramp and down his throat. However, as great an act he was, a conflict arose between him and Manny over Manny's questionable methods of sourcing new acts. Manny found out that Motormouth had been helping some of the anomalous kids that Manny brought in to get back to their families. And as punishment for his insubordination, he was locked in a box and left behind at the end of a Japanese tour. The box was marked for Essie, because Manny thought being put in containment was the best punishment he could think of. With how strange and unusual its acts are, and how it always seems to pop in and out of new locations at strange and unpredictable times, you might wonder if the circus has any sinister motives. Well, the truth is, though sometimes the acts can be a little gruesome, their methods of acquiring new talent are a little unorthodox, and the clowns a little out of control. Their only goal is to entertain. In that respect, they're no better or worse than any other circus. So we hope you've enjoyed your visit. Make sure to stick around for the show, and don't forget to take your complimentary serving of cotton candy. Because there's nothing quite like a day at the circus, especially one like Herman Fuller's. Jay and Michael were a pair of urban exploration YouTubers looking for their big break. You might remember their video exploring the dead mall on the outskirts of your town, or the supposedly haunted 1950s insane asylum out in the sticks. But you certainly won't find these videos anywhere online. After the incident at SCP-823, all of their content was scrubbed away from even the most comprehensive internet archives. Why, you ask? Because these unfortunate urban explorers decided that their big break would be exploring a certain abandoned theme park, and it would be one of the last decisions they ever made. Michael and Jay had heard rumors about the theme park. Its name was lost to time, as was the date of its opening and closing, and the reason it was even abandoned in the first place. Even some of the most hardcore urban explorers didn't dare to tread there. Something about it, a good friend had once told Jay, just didn't feel right. Sometimes if you dare to venture into the forest near the theme park at night, you can still hear music. The jolly, piping tunes of rides and carnival stands still beckoning, as if to say, we're still here, come and play. Of course, none of this frightened Jay and Michael. They could already smell the sponsorships from headlamp and compact camera companies. No amount of anxiety would stop them from making their doomed trip to the so-called Carnival of Horrors. It's a terrible shame. If they'd listened to the stories of this place about how unnatural and evil it could be, they might still be alive today. Like all the best urban explorers, they arrived at the woods near the abandoned theme park in the dead of night. They ignored the signs warning them about everything from structural instability to dangerous wild animals to asbestos. Nothing would keep them out. Nothing. They reached the abandoned theme park not long after, though it was a mere shell of its former self. During the several decades of abandonment, nature had reclaimed it. The Ferris wheel was covered in overgrown ivy, and the carnival stands were blanketed with mold. As the duo swept through the grounds with their flashlights and cameras, they saw a faded sign that bore the words, "Thriller Chiller."
the park's most popular roller coaster. They also took their time to marvel at the exceptionally creepy-looking Tunnel of Love, the broken-down House of Mirrors, and a huge grinning statue of the park's former mascot, Happy Hippo. This theme park was something out of a nightmare, which naturally made it potential video gold. But as the excited duo wandered further into the park, they couldn't help but notice the quiet, tinny carnival music that seemed to be drawing them closer. Michael asked Jay if he could hear the strange, impossible music, and felt a chill creep in when he answered that he did. Could all of the stories be true? They were lost in thought, but their legs kept moving. They were getting closer to something now. They could feel a presence, and was that music getting louder? An instant later though, another sound cut through the silence. Bang, bang. It echoed out through the still night air. Birds flew from their perches in the trees. Jay and Michael both fell to the ground dead, their heads taken off by the .50 caliber rounds of a highly trained mobile task force sniper on the payroll of the SCP Foundation. Their recording equipment, along with their bodies, were taken and destroyed. Any trace of them were scrubbed from the internet. It may seem a little harsh, but a bullet to the head is much kinder fate than what would have awaited these two if they'd kept walking. That's because the Carnival of Horrors is no dark fairy tale. The rumors are all true, and something really is waiting in the dark. That's why this abandoned theme park is known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-823, a Euclid-class anomaly with a violent history. What's even more unnerving is that the researchers studying 823 have repeatedly implored the O5 Council to increase the park's classification to Ketier and allocate more resources for containment, only to be denied. But after you've heard about the horrors that unfolded there and the danger it poses, you'll probably take the researchers' side. The park is divided into two zones, the yellow zone and the red zone. There are to be at least 6 members of Foundation personnel present in the yellow zone at all times to ensure that no civilians wander in. Our 2 urban explorers earn themselves a death sentence not just by wandering into the yellow zone, but passing dangerously close to the red zone. This is the true epicenter of the park's dangerous, anomalous activity. It's a place so hazardous that anyone entering, whether they're a civilian or a member of Foundation staff, is to be executed at a distance by sniper fire without hesitation. Once upon a time, though nobody knows exactly when, there was a theme park that seemed no different to any other. Eager children and thrill-seeking teens arrived by the busload, ready to stuff their faces with cotton candy and corn dogs, and then reverse the process on a vast array of roller coasters. But even then, during these good times, there was something dark lurking behind the cheerful facade. Little by little, everyone, visitors and employees alike, started falling victim to strange and horrific accidents around the park. Of course, when it comes to theme parks, accidents come with the territory, but none like this. Here are just a handful of the horrific and mysterious deaths that occurred while the park was open. So strap in, because just like a roller coaster, this isn't for the faint of heart. A pair of young lovebirds decided they wanted to enjoy the romance of the Tunnel of Love. The two sat in a swan-shaped boat as they were ferried through darkened passageways. Anyone would assume that they were having a great time, but at some point, terrible shrieks of pain and fear began to echo through the ride. Attendants, confused and terrified, stopped the ride and found that the screaming persisted. Just some stupid teens playing a prank, they figured, and started the ride again. But when the swan-shaped boat finally exited the Tunnel of Love, the park employees were greeted to a horrifying sight. The 2 teens dead, their bodies somehow fused together at multiple points. Another unlucky customer met a gruesome fate inside the House of Mirrors. They entered, but while inside, they were stalked by a mysterious, carnivorous humanoid entity known as Subject 79. The customer was pursued and eventually caught by Subject 79 and brutally dismembered. Some parts of the body were fused to the House of Mirrors' interior, while others, like the right arm, were never found. The customer actually survived their ordeal, and whether that's a happy ending is up to you. But it wasn't just the customers at the park who were in danger. A 23-year-old park employee working a summer job collapsed while entertaining children dressed as the park's cheerful mascot, Happy Hippo. It wasn't uncommon for people to get overheated and collapse in the heavy suits on hot days. But one thing was different here. He was screaming, crying,
and trying desperately to remove his mask. People rushed to help, but nobody could get the suit off, and he was declared dead soon after. When he was eventually cut out of the suit, coroners found that the employee had choked to death. His mouth, trachea, and lungs were filled with a fibrous substance later determined to be identical to the stuffing of his costume. An intense roller coaster known as the Thriller Chiller was a magnet for horrific accidents, which became more violent and intense over time. The first accident seemed like a typical theme park tragedy. A safety harness failed, dropping a rider 15 feet during an inverted loop. They landed on the track below, breaking their neck and skull, causing instant death. While this was a tragedy, it wasn't exactly anomalous. But the next major accident on the ride was an entirely different story. This time, 15 people met with disaster while riding the Thriller Chiller roller coaster. Starting from the front and moving back one car at a time, each group of riders was decapitated by blunt force trauma. A new pair of decapitations appeared to happen at every turn and loop on the ride. Forensic scientists still have no idea how this could have possibly occurred. Despite all of these disasters, the park was only finally abandoned after a day known as Bloody Sunday, when the anomalous powers of the location reached a 20-year peak. It's believed that 231 people were killed during the carnage of that day, and another 7 were horribly maimed. The SCP Foundation contained the Carnival of Horrors not long after, but the mysterious deaths didn't even end there. Foundation Mobile Task Force Row 71, also known as the Origami Toads, were sent in to assess containment procedures and discover the source of all the anomalous deaths. They were unsuccessful though, and instead they merely added to the list in exceptionally horrifying ways. One agent was found dead, surrounded by empty grenades and bullet casings. It appeared he'd removed the explosive propellant from all of his ballistics and consumed it, dying in the process. Another was found with his jaw broken, having apparently pulled out and inhaled his own teeth, and dying of the resulting internal damage. The commander got the worst fate of all, so horrifying in fact, that we can't tell you the full details. All you need to know is that something was shoved into his brain that really didn't belong there. The Foundation considered having the entire park destroyed with a massive airstrike, courtesy of the Mobile Task Force News 7, aka Hammerdown. However, the O5 Council denied this request, on the basis that the park was too close to populated land. They'd have no plausible cover story for the bombing, and they don't even really know if blowing up the park would prevent anomalous activity from occurring. The Carnival of Horrors is here to stay, folks. The Foundation just hopes to keep it from getting new visitors. So then back to why the researchers want this place upgraded to Ketir. After all, these classifications aren't about how dangerous an anomaly is. They're about how difficult and complicated they are to contain. But here's the problem. According to the researchers, the red zone, where the dangerous anomalous activity is at its peak, isn't bound to one fixed position. It's changed position at least 3 times already, and even worse, it appears to be growing. Not seemingly so Euclid class now, is it? After all, you might not even need to visit the Carnival of Horrors to be in grave danger. If it keeps growing, then someday soon, the Carnival of Horrors may be visiting you. In an old house, an old woman gathers her knitting supplies. This is a special project for a little boy named Tommy she loves dearly. She knits furiously, and soon the mix of cotton, synthetic fiber, and cloth of every color turn from raw materials into something else. A teddy bear. She puts the finishing touches on the bear. This is a very special bear, after all, and sends the patchwork bear off to its destination with a red Get Well card. The card is labeled Kairos the Bear, and inside she writes a personal note. To Tommy, because only time can mend all wounds. Love, Grammy. But this package of love would never reach its destination. SCP-2295 was found at the site of a crashed mail truck, and it looks exactly like a standard handmade teddy bear, with one difference. On the left side of its chest, just under its jaunty tan bow, it wears a heart-shaped pin. But not a standard cartoon heart. This is a disturbingly realistic, anatomically correct pin of a heart organ. And that's because SCP-2295 has a specific purpose. and it's one that has everything to do with actual human organs. SCP-2295 spends most of its time completely inert, spending its days as just another cuddly stuffed toy. Tests performed on the toy revealed that it had no unusual properties and seems to be a normal handmade keepsake. That is, until someone is injured in its presence. Not any injury will do. A paper cut or even a broken arm, for example, won't do much to activate its anomalous properties. But if it detects a critical injury to a human organ nearby, it will trigger a secret power, one that the Foundation is still trying to figure out how it works. Because SCP-2295 is a miracle worker. When it senses the presence of someone with a serious injury to an organ and is within 2 meters of them, SCP-2295 springs into action. Suddenly, from unknown sources, the bear will produce objects including scissors, white thread, and sewing needles or a crocheting hook from its mouth. If there are any crafting supplies on hand, it will incorporate those as well. And then it gets to work. Despite only having hands made of fabric and stuffing with no fingers, the anomalous bear is still able to craft what will end up being a patchwork recreation of the damaged human's organ. Cute, if a little creepy, but that's just the beginning. The injured person mysteriously falls unconscious, and the patchwork organ, which the Foundation has designated as SCP-2295-1 instance, will disappear. The SCP-2295-1 instance will then physically replace the damaged organ inside the person's body. It's unknown how this happens. The patchwork organ will simply appear inside of their body, taking the place of the original lung or kidney, or whichever organ was failing. It's unknown where the original organ goes to, since it seems to just disappear as soon as the 2295-1 instance takes its place. Surprisingly, having this new cotton-stuffed heart or liver does not seem to cause any harm, and in fact it works exactly like the real thing. There are never any of the usual issues that come with a transplant, like the risk of it being rejected by the body, as the organic tissue seems to have no issue connecting with the organ, and treating it like it was there all along. In all instances of SCP-2295 performing this adorable but rudimentary surgery, the subjects have made a full and complete recovery. SCP-2295 might sound like a miracle worker, but that isn't to say that its abilities aren't without their own set of complications. When faced with 2 injured subjects, SCP-2295 seems to always gravitate towards fixing the younger subject up first, maybe owing to its creation by a grandmother who wanted to heal whatever was ailing her grandson. No one knows who Tommy was or exactly what disease or injury he was recovering from, but his grandmother clearly felt it was serious enough to create this special bear for him. While SCP-2295 will heal anyone, it seems to be primarily a guardian for the young, and it takes its duties very seriously, even to the point of self-sacrifice. While SCP-2295 is able to pull some of its supplies out of thin air, it still always needs some raw materials to craft the new organ, including fabric and stuffing. And if there are none available, SCP-2295 will obtain them the hard way. The patchwork bear will sacrifice its own body, tearing itself open and removing any fabric or stuffing it needs without any concern for its own well-being. In order to craft a new organ for its patient, it slowly regenerates its own stuffing, at the rate of around 1 gram of stuffing per day, but it needs to harvest fabric to repair its outer layer, which the Foundation happily makes available to it, offering it a variety of patterns and types. It's no surprise that a teddy bear capable of healing mortal wounds would be of great interest to the SCP Foundation, and as soon as it was recovered from the crashed mail truck, they immediately began tests to find out more about it. Could it heal literally any organ? Were there any limits to its abilities? There was only one way to find out, and the Foundation had the perfect test subjects. D-Class personnel, whose interactions with non-cuddly teddy bear SCPs frequently left them with critical external and internal injuries. The first test subject brought in, D-2353, a 38-year-old man who was in poor health not due to his work as a D-Class personnel, but from his years and years of heavy smoking. His lungs were seriously damaged, which gave him trouble breathing and made any serious physical exertion extremely difficult. He wasn't critically injured or in danger of dying immediately, but that didn't matter to SCP-2295. D-2353 quickly passed out, and the bear sprang into action. He proceeded to take 2 textile swatches, one black and one red, and create a pair of fabric lungs which it installed in the patient. When he awoke, D2353 found he had full healthy lung function again, as if he never picked up his deadly habit. But now the Foundation researchers needed to know how SCP-2295 would do with even more complicated ailments. D3542 was 50 years old and his heart was not in good shape. Not only did he have a serious case of atherosclerosis, which is a disease where cholesterol plaque builds up and blocks blood flow and can put you at serious risk of a heart attack, but he also had an irregular heartbeat. This D-class was in bad shape, but that was no problem for SCP-2295, who took a collection of different colors of yarn and a crochet hook and created a plushy heart. Just like the lungs had acted as if they were completely regular organs, after the heart anomalously ended up inside the man's chest, it began to beat normally and performed all the complicated functions of a human heart. But there was one detail that shocked the onlooking doctors. Before the yarn organ had vanished, the doctors had seen that it was beating. So is there any organ that SCP-2295 can't replace? That was about to be tested when D7894 was brought in. A 24-year-old woman, she had suffered serious burns all over her torso, left abdomen, and right leg. She was brought in and sedated to numb the agonizing pain, and researchers were worried that they had come up against the limit of SCP-2295's abilities, since the skin is the largest organ after all. But SCP-2295 wasn't fazed at all. The bear immediately started sewing segments of patchwork fabric and layering them onto the damaged skin, replacing the dermis and epidermis layer by layer. Unlike the other cases, these replacement organs are visible, and D7894 now has patchwork skin, just like her talented surgeon. And amazingly, the fabric has the same sense of touch that her regular skin did. The final test of SCP-2295's abilities came with D2723, who was only 18 years old. This last-minute D-class test was performed because he was showing signs of severe cerebral hemorrhage, the kind that would cause brain damage in only minutes, and would be followed soon after by complete brain death. SCP-2295 sprung to life, but as soon as it examined the test subject, it became distressed. It started frantically grasping at random material around it, as if it didn't know what to do with them. Then it reached inside itself and provided a large chocolate bar, which it offered to the subject, sadly to no effect. It then seemed to admit defeat as it grabbed tightly onto the subject's leg. Observers reported that it was leaking a tear-like solution from its small knitted eyes as it embraced the dying D-class in his final moments. Sadly, it seems that the human brain is the one mystery that even SCP-2295 can't solve. SCP-2295 appears to pose no threat to anyone and was classified as safe after testing. It is inactive when not in the presence of an injured person, and has never displayed hostile instincts when active. The Foundation determined that it should be stored in a standard containment locker in Site-37, where it can be kept safely until it's needed for tests or to repair an injured SCP personnel. Access is limited to those with Level 3 or higher security clearance, and any contact with the bear is highly regulated. But there is one element of SCP-2295's existence that continues to worry Foundation staff. SCP-2295's full origins and the grandmother who crafted it are unknown. The note it was found with is the only clue as to where it may have come from, but there are plenty within the Foundation who are suspicious of the veracity of this letter, and they have good reason not to be too trusting. Because another bear with similar abilities exists, and it is distinctly less benevolent than SCP-2295. SCP-1048 is also a teddy bear, but it is capable of moving on its own and communicating through gestures at all times. It was initially allowed to wander around independently, and seemed to make its home at Site-24 a happier place, but then it began to display its own crafting abilities. SCP-1048 is able to craft duplicates of itself, and while the original was seemingly harmless, the ones it made were not. These similarly shaped bears were made of disturbing materials and were extremely hostile towards any humans they encountered. The first, SCP-1048-A, was made entirely out of human ears, and when it shrieked, it caused anyone nearby to generate ear-like growths all over their bodies, eventually causing them to suffocate. The creature disappeared, and an on-site researcher was found to be missing an ear. The creations of SCP-1048 only got stranger and deadlier from there. SCP-1048-B was found in the site's cafeteria, where it was moving around in a halted, jerky fashion. It then started bursting at the seams and revealed what appeared to be a human fetus inside. When the creature screamed, it sounded like a much louder version of a human infant, and its crows caused massive internal damage to anyone around it. SCP-1048-B was killed in the ensuing conflict with Foundation agents, ending its threat. But SCP-1048 was learning deadlier techniques. When SCP-1048-C was discovered, it looked to be a teddy bear made entirely out of rusty scrap metal. When it was spotted by Dr. Carver and targeted by Foundation personnel, the creature turned violent and proved to have incredible strength, jumping through the agents who were trying to neutralize it, tearing through their bodies like tissue paper. Attempts to damage it were unsuccessful, and both it and the bear made out of ears are still on the loose along with the original SCP-1048. Capturing it is major priority for the Foundation, because no one wants to see what it will create next. Is there a connection between these two very different teddy bears? No one has been able to answer this question. The origins of SCP-1048 are unknown, and so is any connection to the mysterious grandmother who may have made Kairos the bear, but their abilities are similar, with both able to craft living objects out of seemingly any material. They just have very different ideas as to what a good use of their crafting abilities are. It is fortunate that an anomaly as potentially powerful as SCP-2295 seems to only want one thing: to help those in need, especially those who are the most vulnerable.
Every town has its urban legends. An unnatural abomination with the body of an animal and the head of a human lurking the forests. A bridge said to curse any who stand under it in the dead of night. A lurking serial killer continuing his crimes from beyond the grave. You might be familiar with the Hook Man, a chilling tale about a young couple finding a man's hooked hand hanging on the back of their car. Or tales about mysterious clowns being sighted in the woods outside of suburban areas. Over time, the truth behind an urban legend will become muddled, and the original story might change countless times before emerging in its present form. They might entertain us, they sometimes might even scare us, but all urban legends feed on the tiny sliver that they might be true. That voice inside your head telling you that it might not be just a story designed to scare you, and that there are some aspects of the world that are truly unknown. And most of all, you, the average person, can get caught up in this world, forced into it against your will by pure chance. A deranged killer, an unknown sea creature lurking in a lake, a curse, a poorly understood creature never before seen by science. All of these images conjure up fear, but when combined with the personalized nature of an urban legend, which adds familiar places, names, and situations to the mix, it's no wonder why these stories take off. Rodney Hallows Town, the name of which has been scrubbed from all documentation by the Foundation, was no different in that it had its own share of urban legends. Even though the town's name is lost due to the SCP Foundation wiping its name from official documentation, know that Rodney was an average teenager, living an average life, and doing average things a person his age might do. And that included taking his friends up on dares that he might regret later, dares pertaining to those urban legends. Kids daring one another to do something like this is nothing new. Whether it's saying Bloody Mary 3 times in a row before a bathroom mirror in the dark, or taking a trip to an abandoned building and staying the night there, you should be undoubtedly familiar with how these things work, and how easy it is to get a susceptible young mind to do them. Who wants to risk an encounter with the supernatural? Well, people who don't mind to do them. Well, people who don't want to chicken out in front of their friends, of course. Getting cursed by a ghost, or the more realistic possibility of accidentally injuring yourself while exploring an abandoned area is nothing compared to the feeling of satisfaction that comes from looking cool in front of your friends. At least, that rings true when you're 14 years old. But Rodney Hollow was above that. He was, more than anything else, a scaredy cat to his core. No amount of peer pressure could make him fold, because his fears outweighed his social capital. If Rodney was afraid of it, his friends knew that there was no chance of getting him near it. In a way, it was admirable. He could be offered money, food, literally anything he wanted, and if Rodney didn't want to do it, he wouldn't. Not just that, but he felt like he physically couldn't. It was like every bone in his body would freeze up. His heart would start beating intensely, and he would internally panic. It was a regular feeling of fear, sure, but Rodney felt it often. A fear of exams, a fear of the future, snakes, spiders, open windows at night. Rodney was always overthinking things, and his fears were well known among the small circle he associated himself with. Naturally, Rodney's friends acted their age and spent a lot of time trying to come up with new and exciting ways to scare the daylights out of the poor kid. This could be playing pranks on him, giving Rodney phone calls from hidden numbers, or trying to get him to watch horror movies. It was getting to the point where Rodney was more annoyed than anything else, and he was beginning to heavily reconsider with who he hung out with. But if there was one person who could convince Rodney to do something, it was Claire, a girl in his class he had a tiny bit of a crush on. And by a tiny bit, we mean that Rodney was so willing to make himself look good in front of Claire that he willingly accompanied his friends to a supposedly haunted house located in a rural area just outside of town. This was Rodney's town's urban legend, and while it wasn't well known, this broken-down house was slowly gaining a reputation among the town's youth as a gateway between the realm of the living and the dead. The lore varied depending on who you asked, but it was said to be haunted by the spirit of a puppet maker who experimented with making puppets out of human bodies. His reclusive nature and isolated lifestyle meant that his crimes and experiments went unnoticed until his death, when law enforcement seized the house and cleared out hundreds of mutilated, half-human, half-wooden puppet creatures. Of course, this was all just hearsay, and there was no actual proof beyond what was said at Rodney's lunch table. But as seasoned viewers of this channel know, in the world of the SCP Foundation, there is always a kernel of truth in even the slightest story of the unknown. The outline of Rodney's dare was simple. He and Claire would have to spend an hour inside the house alone, while his friends waited for him outside of it. Pretty great friends, huh? Under any other circumstances, Rodney would have refused to even leave his house that night. But the prospects of looking good in front of Claire were too tempting for even the scariest of scaredy cats to pass up. Besides, if he played it cool, he could use this as a way to talk to Claire and actually get to know her a bit better. They'd have a whole hour together. Just an hour inside a dark, dilapidated house occupied by a puppet maker serial killer's ghost. That's all. Still, Rodney clenched his fist and grit his teeth, determined to shake off his reputation as a wimp. The house stood before him, and Claire stood beside him. They moved forward together, much to the chuckling and stifled laughter of the kids behind them, and with a forceful jiggling of the locked doorknob using a makeshift lockpick made out of a paperclip and a piece of metal, they entered the house. The inside was dark, but that much was to be expected. As soon as the two entered, the door slammed itself shut, and a clicking sound was heard, indicating that it was now locked. Immediately, Rodney knew something was wrong. He had a feeling he would see some unexplained things, but he didn't expect one to occur immediately after he entered. The door just slammed itself shut. Claire turned back and attempted to open it, but she had no luck. Rodney, in what he felt was a smooth move, told her to calm down, and that when the hour was eventually up, they could just break through a window to get out. This seemed to work, and Claire hesitantly calmed herself. The interior of the house was old, done in a Baroque style unfitting of the unimpressive exterior. A spiraling staircase, a few paintings, armchairs in front of a fireplace. It was clear that whoever lived here, if they didn't have money, they certainly had access to skilled craftsmanship. There were faint pockets of light in the distance, coming from candles positioned sparsely throughout the home. The two began to explore, not content to stay in any one place for too long. The frightened duo came to an ornate yet run-down kitchen. Their footsteps creaked with every movement, but when they stopped, they noticed that the stepping sounds didn't. Rodney began to panic as he was used to. Keeping a cool head in this situation was next to impossible. Slow stepping sounds coming from various parts of the house. They moved closer, practically clinging to each other. If Rodney wasn't so scared, this would have been an ideal situation, but he couldn't even appreciate it. The footsteps didn't grow louder, they just increased in number. Slow-moving steps coming from above, below, and beside them. And then in the distance, from the poorly lit hallway in front of them, Rodney saw a shape. A jerkily moving, barely visible shape, but it was approaching them. Claire saw it too, and the two ran out of the kitchen and back to the front of the house. They banged on the door begging and screaming for their friends to let them back out, but there was no response. They tried to break open a window, but they physically found themselves unable to damage the house. It was as if they wanted to protect it instead of damage it, even though both of them knew they absolutely wanted to break a window and run out of the house as fast as possible. The figure was approaching, and the footsteps didn't stop either. It was then that Rodney caught a glimpse of the figure that was trailing them, a picture only visible due to the brief flash of candlelight. It was a sunken, hollowed-out corpse, with button eyes and rust-brown skin. As soon as it moved beyond the candle, the entity was difficult to see again, but Rodney was unable to scrub that brief image from his mind. It jerked towards them, slow step by slow step, and then it lunged forward at a frightening, fast, unnatural speed. The two screamed. Rodney fell to the floor, passed out in fear, and then everything went quiet. Rodney and Claire were just another disappearance that had a connection to that abandoned house, and when the local police force launched an investigation, they compiled over 20 cases of teenagers from ages 12 to 17 that went missing as a result of visiting the abandoned home over the past decade. A small team of law enforcement were dispatched to inspect and investigate the home in person, but they did not return. It was at this point when the incident caught the attention of the SCP Foundation, who overtook the investigation and launched a massive cover story that involved a mass amnesticization of law enforcement officers and relatives of the missing persons, as well as a planting of a memetic agent in the area that induced brain patterns that would discourage the town's residents from talking about or spreading the urban legend of the house. The Foundation quickly established containment procedures and a security perimeter was set up around the house. After a cursory preliminary batch of research and testing, the house was decidedly anomalous and was given the designation of SCP-1098-RU, labeled as such due to the investigation taking place in Russia and being handled by the Russian branch of the SCP Foundation. SCP-1098-RU's containment procedures, on top of the cover story that was put into place to discourage and suppress the spread of the urban legend, were effective in deterring civilians from entering the area. Originally, the city administration had proposed to destroy and dismantle the house years ago, but the building's demolition was constantly postponed by bureaucratic red tape. The entirety of the area was fenced in and patrolled by an armed security detail at all hours, with the guards shifting positions every 6 hours. If any civilians attempted to enter, they would be arrested and interrogated, with the use of amnestics permitted. If anything regarding SCP-1098-RU were to change, the guards would have to report it to Site 7 and wait for further instruction. From the Foundation's research, it was determined that SCP-1098-RU was a difficult anomaly to analyze. The house's primary anomalous effect was a protective one. All of the windows and the front door of SCP-1098-RU were automatically locked, and if someone attempted to enter the house via physically damaging one of these spots, or anywhere else on the house, they would find themselves unable to do so. Instead, they would feel motivated to protect SCP-1098-RU and prevent any damage to it. This, of course, wouldn't override any other pre-existing feelings toward the house, so as we saw in Rodney's case, this can result in a conflict of interest where the victim wanted to escape but was unable to due to the house's protective trap. This effect is only active when a person is within at least 50 meters of SCP-1098-RU, which explains why the plans for the house's demolition were plotted, but actually unable to be carried out. The only way to enter SCP-1098 is the house's front door, through use of a lockpicking device or another way to break the door's lock. Upon entry, the door will close automatically, lock itself from the outside, and is unable to be opened for the next hour. Attempts to break into the house before this hour is through are futile, as the anomaly's protective measures will trigger in order to prevent damage coming from the house. The home's origins are presently unknown, as the Foundation is still investigating them.
but the urban legend of the puppet maker who turned his victims into puppets may hold some credence. SCP-1098-1 is an entity that has been nicknamed the Master of Puppets, and you're about to see why. But the entity is a self-containing spirit, believed to be the cause of most of the anomalous phenomenon within the house. The Foundation hasn't found a way to contact or research the -1 entity beyond observing the brief appearances of it during testing, so information on the anomaly is limited to what's been observed, and that would be candles that are unable to be extinguished or replaced, strange glows of light emerging from the cracks in sealed windows and walls, hallucinations based on the fears of the victims trapped inside, and the sound of slow approaching steps from throughout the house. These steps are unable to be recorded using audio devices, but the Foundation has reason to believe they're produced by the entity itself. Still, there's a lot of mystery surrounding SCP-1098. Where did it come from? What is the SCP-1098-1 entity? And most importantly, where do the corpses of its victims go? That one is easy to answer. The bodies of those who die inside SCP-1098 will be preserved by the entity and altered to take on the appearance of puppets. Their eyes will be removed, and long, thick threads will be sewn into their extremities. But what does SCP-1098-RU need these puppets for? A look into the Foundation's initial research documents regarding the house may provide the answer. The Foundation's exploration of SCP-1098-RU occurred shortly after the object was put into containment, and remains the primary source of information on how the anomaly functions and how its intricacies work. The first test involved a remote-controlled drone equipped with recording equipment, the Foundation's safest way to observe hostile, unknown, anomalous territory from a distance. The drone entered and was quickly locked inside the house. As it proceeded, it found several damaged, altered corpses of missing persons in various rooms of the house. The bodies were missing their eyes, and all had thick strings sewn onto them, with stitch marks on the chest and face areas. Strangely, the bodies weren't decomposed at all, despite some of the corpses being identified as people who disappeared months ago. The drone survey also found several objects of interest: a set of surgical knives, threads, needles, and a prosthetic artificial eye. While the drone didn't detect the -1 entity, Foundation researchers could only speculate as to where and what these objects were used for, and by who. The second test involved sending a D-Class personnel into the building. He was supplied with a flashlight and recording equipment, and was tasked with re-examining the first floor of the house. The only difference the D-Class observed from the drone exploration was that the candles were clearly replaced by newer ones, indicating that someone had changed them. Footsteps were heard throughout the home, sometimes in areas that the D-Class had just emerged from. Upon re-entering one room to investigate, the D-Class was ordered to take a surgical knife back to command for further study. However, as soon as he lifted the knife, communication immediately cut off, and the Foundation was unable to re-establish contact. A third test was held shortly after to determine what happened to the D-Class, as well as explore the second floor of SCP-1098, this time using another remote-controlled drone. The drone found that the house on its second floor had a sewing workshop, filled with all of the materials you would expect to find in such, including threads, machinery, and tools. Multiple corpses were found, all dressed in 18th century clothes, their eyes replaced with artificial ones, and with strings sewn into their bodies. Upon the drone's return, communication was cut off yet again, and when the hour period was up and the house's door opened, there was no sign of it anywhere. The fourth test into SCP-1098 involved another D-Class personnel, who was instructed to attempt to leave the building before an hour passed. After entering, the D-Class reported a throbbing headache and immediate pressure in his ears. He reported that someone was crying in the farthest room on the first floor, but the equipment couldn't pick anything up. After entering, he reported that he saw a little girl wearing an old-fashioned dress, and she was dancing and crying, being pulled upward into motion by the strings that were sewn onto her back. These strings on camera were completely invisible to the Foundation, leading the command to believe that the D-Class was experiencing hallucinations. The D-Class simply stood and observed, almost transfixed by the girl. He remarked that it seemed like the strings stretched on forever, and that there was no ceiling, even though the Foundation could clearly see the ceiling of the room on the camera. After 5 minutes of silence and observation, a startling clap was heard as the camera's visuals cut out, and then a male voice, but not that of the D-Class, spoke.
In perseveture spretium.
When translated from Latin to English, it read, "The performance must be paid for." After this, the Foundation put a stop to all further experimentation with SCP-1098-RU, content with the data they had gained. Until the Foundation gains more information about SCP-1098 and the mysterious entity inside, sending more resources in will only result in them meeting a gruesome demise. Until then, they can only speculate about the true nature of the entity, known as the Master of Puppets. High school is a turbulent time for a lot of us, to say the least. Subjects are a lot harder, classes feel longer, and because you're older, there can be so much more pressure put on you by your teachers and parents alike. There's a lot more onus for you to perform well in tests and make sure that you get good grades, thanks to everyone around you telling you that these are the most important years of your life, or that your high school experience will determine your whole future for good or for bad. Actually, come to think of it, pressure feels like a bit of an understatement. As if there weren't already enough things to worry about when you're trying to make your way through high school, the changes to yourself get thrown into the mix as well. Growing up and getting older often means developing a further, previously unseen level of self-awareness and understanding of who you are as a person. That can be true of any part of life, but high school can often be the first time we're aware of ourselves in such a heightened way. Usually everything we're experiencing during that time can make some of us self-conscious, shying away from others to avoid embarrassment or becoming brash and loud to overcompensate for just how uncertain they might be feeling deep down. Then, of course, on top of that already huge mountain, romantic feelings get thrown into the mix as well. Sure, in the grand scheme of things, high school romances are usually just tiny, almost insignificant footnotes in the stories of our lives. But obviously, they don't feel like it at the time. When you're right there, living through that part of your life without the benefit of hindsight that comes later, your high school crush can feel like the very center of the entire universe. Being introduced to and surrounded by more people than ever, more than any previous stage of schooling, means that romantic feelings usually have a higher likelihood of developing and are made more prominent by the whole other whirlwind of things that high school brings with it. Case in point, Ellie was having this exact problem. For as long as she could remember, she had never really got people. They were confusing, complicated, and completely unpredictable. Usually, they frustrated Ellie, which made it hard for her to talk to most of her classmates, especially if she didn't already know them that well. The common ground could sometimes make it a little easier. It helped break the ice, but finding those shared interests or similarities was often harder than just spending time on her own. Then came along Marcus, or Marky, as Ellie heard he preferred to be called. On the first day of the semester, she had been placed in a new math class. The second Marky came walking through the door, she immediately found herself unable to keep her eyes off him, especially because he ended up taking the seat directly in front of hers, meaning he was always filling up most of her view when she looked straight ahead. Despite looking like a skater type, from what Ellie observed, Marky was pretty sharp. She was no slouch herself, usually noting down correct answers a few moments before whoever the teacher called on. Whenever Marky was called on, he also had the exact right solution to whatever problem or equation the rest of the class was probably still struggling to keep up with. Despite knowing very little about him, Ellie couldn't help feeling a certain new and unfamiliar way towards this particular classmate. It was like they were both operating at the same speed, on identical wavelengths. If only she knew more about him. And it was during class that Ellie had an idea about how she could get to know him better, but without the awkward, uncomfortable interactions that came from slipping about on the ice rather than breaking it. She could use the doll. Sure, she had been mulling it over, toying with the possibility for a while, but wasn't certain that it was right for her to follow that course of action. But as the days turned into weeks, getting deeper and deeper into the semester brought with it the possibility that another girl would catch Marky's attention the way he had caught Ellie's. Just the thought of that alone made her want to cry. She couldn't bear to see it become reality. One day in class, her chance presented itself on what had been an unusually hot day. The scorching heat outdoors was causing all the students to groan in discomfort, barely able to acknowledge anything other than the high temperature. Meanwhile, all the teachers could possibly do was open up the windows to counteract the relentless weather, but it was nothing more than a futile gesture. Sitting down in front of Ellie, Marky shrugged off the denim jacket he always wore, leaving it to hang over the back of his chair. Her eyes honed in on what she needed. Clinging to the surface of the acid-washed material was a single strand of black hair. She knew she had to pick her moment carefully. If the teacher, or any of the other students in the class, or worst of all, Marky himself saw what she was doing, it would look beyond weird. Leaning forward on her desk as subtly as she could, Ellie slowly reached forward. Her fingers wouldn't reach. The back of Marky's chair was just an inch or two further than her arms extended. Ellie felt her heart stop for a split second as her crush moved in his chair, the shift causing the jacket to move and the strand of his hair dropped, almost falling out of sight. Sighing with relief as silently as she could, when she saw the black streak manage to stay attached to the denim, Ellie fished a pen out from inside her pencil case. Leaning forward again, she delicately lifted the pointed tip of her pen, hooking the hair onto it. Pulling it back towards her before anyone saw, she covered it with her hand, both to hide what she had done and to stop the precious hair from being caught by the warm, humid breeze pouring through the open windows. Gently, she placed the one missing component she needed into a clean tissue, which she then folded 4 times and kept in her jacket, constantly checking throughout the day to make sure it was still there. On more than one of those quick spot checks, Ellie felt her heart plummet downwards for a second when she couldn't immediately feel the tissue in her pocket, only to calm down a second later to realize it was still there, with its precious contents inside too. The rest of the day, she felt tense, drumming her fingers together in impatience, every hour feeling like it would go on forever. It was just a case of waiting out the day until that final bell rung. The moment she was able, she rushed away from the school, walking home as quickly as she possibly could, one hand in her pocket to keep the hair secure. Ellie was lucky enough, or unlucky depending on your view, to live in the same town as her school and not too far away to need the bus. She could make her way there on foot in pretty decent time. Normally the buses from the school would pass her as she walked. Looking up, she saw one of the huge yellow vehicles driving down the street, and a familiar face sat at a window seat. Marky. Seeing him, Ellie quickened her pace, speed-walking home. The moment she unlocked the front door and closed it behind her, she threw off her backpack and raced upstairs to her bedroom. She knew exactly where she'd left it. As she flipped on her lamp, it was laying there on the desk ready for her. The naughty stalker. The tiny doll was made of one single knitted string, with a pair of shiny onyx beads against the red of its face in the place of eyes. Ellie had come across the little oddity in a box of her grandmother's things. Although she never knew her all that well after she had died, Ellie's mom had gone to clear her house up and came back with a few boxes full of keepsakes. "These are all your grandma's things I couldn't sell or think of what to do with," her mother explained, offering her the cardboard box. "If you can pick out anything that you like, it's yours, Elle. I'm sure Grandma wouldn't mind." Looking inside, there wasn't much save for a few old clothes, knickknacks, souvenirs, and trinkets that were mostly all broken, or the odd piece of jewelry that looked too worn out and rusted to wear. But right at the bottom was the doll. It was wrapped up in a crumpled piece of paper that might have been clear white at some point, but had changed shades with age. Unfolding it, Ellie read the message inscribed on one side. "Congratulations on your purchase of a genuine naughty stalker. Do you love someone but they won't give you the time of day? Do you wish you could hear what they say about you behind their back? Well, wonder no more. Using this fantabulous product, you can keep track of your loved one's every move and their every word. All you have to do is get a single hair from the head of the object of your desires, slip it under a loose string on our naughty stalker, and see what you're missing." Another wonderful product, brought to you by the factory. Now that same crumpled note was in Ellie's hands, her eyes scanning over the instructions a final time to make sure she knew exactly what to do. She didn't much care for the name of it though. Naughty stalker. The latter word had a very negative connotation. What she was doing here wasn't stalking, Ellie told herself. She just wanted an easier way to learn about Marky. Surely there wouldn't be anything wrong with that.
Pulling the tissue from her pocket, she carefully lay it flat on the desk and unfolded it. The hair was still there, secured between the thin folded paper. Delicately holding it between her finger and thumb, Ellie held the dark strand of Marky's hair in the light of her desk lamp. She treated it as gently as she could, making sure not to break the hair, worried that the doll might not work if it snapped. Taking great care, she slipped it through one of the loops in the naughty stalker's string. For a moment, nothing happened. The doll just lay there on the wooden surface of the desk. It was completely still, not showing even the slightest hint of any change. Feeling the worry building more and more, her heart drumming against her chest so loud that she could practically hear it, Ellie started frantically looking back over the instructions in case she had somehow missed a step. She had no idea what was meant to happen, or even what she'd been expecting, but she was starting to think that this doll might have just been an oddity from an old toy store that marketed them to children by promising things that weren't actually possible. "See you later, guys," a tiny little voice came from the desk, causing Ellie's heart to lurch in shock. The doll was standing upright on the wooden surface. Only seconds before, it had been lying flat on its back. As if by its own accord, the little knitted figure was upright, like it was a living thing. And it wasn't just standing. Its arm was waving and its chest was even gently undulating to mimic the motion of breathing. The naughty stalker kept waving a moment, only to drop its head forward and make an exhaling motion that seemed to be a sigh. "I really wish they wouldn't keep calling me Marky," the same voice spoke up again, this time more clearly coming from the doll. Ellie watched it closer, transfixed with utter fascination. She was aware of the concept of a voodoo doll, a mystical charm that contained a person's hair affixed to a crude figure in order to influence them through magic. This doll seemed much the same, except it was mimicking Marcus's every move. Ellie had overheard him talking to some of his friends in the corridors at school once, talking about home. He lived in the next town over, and the bus must have only just arrived there, because now the doll was walking on the spot, the same heavy-limbed, tired walk home after a long, strenuous day at school. She recognized the walk. It was the same one she did when she made her own way back to her mom's house. For the rest of the night, Ellie didn't take her eyes off the naughty stalker, watching as it streamed Marcus's actions to her live. She watched in real time as he arrived home, sat and did his homework, and went back downstairs to eat dinner. All the while, Ellie was neglecting to do those same things herself. At one point in the night, the doll started dancing around, singing into something invisible in its hand. It made Ellie smile uncontrollably to watch. She had figured out that Marcus was now playing some music through a pair of headphones or a speaker, and singing along in a hairbrush, dancing like no one was watching. The kind of thing that almost everyone does when they're alone, but never admits to. Turning to her computer, keeping one eye on the doll, refusing to stop watching it even in her peripheral vision, Ellie typed the lyrics it was singing into a search engine. Immediately, pages worth of results came up for the song and the band that had sung it. They weren't a group that she had heard of or listened to before, but it was Friday. She had all weekend. Using her mom's card, Ellie ordered herself a t-shirt with the band's name on it. Premium delivery meant it would be there before school next week. On Monday, she showed up at the school wearing the new shirt. It was a few sizes too big, but that meant that the band's logo printed on the front was bigger and harder to miss. Ellie had spent almost her whole weekend watching the doll as it mimicked Marcus's movements. He hadn't done much but play video games and go to the skate park, but she made sure she knew what he was doing. Anytime she wasn't watching, she was listening to the music he liked, getting familiar with it to prepare herself for what was about to happen, as if she had been studying to get ready for a test. Somehow, striding through the corridors full of students milling about first thing in the morning, Ellie felt more confident than ever. "Hey, Marcus," she greeted, spotting her crush rummaging around in his locker and walking straight up to him. "Hey, He paused, looking over her for what felt like the first time. You're, sorry, we have class together, right?" "Math, yeah," she replied, surprising herself at how quickly she'd recovered from the blow that he didn't even know her name. "I'm Ellie. I sit right behind you." Right. Marcus smiled. "You don't have to use my full name. Everyone just calls me Marky around here." "But you don't like that nickname. I can tell." Ellie shot him a smile, trying to do her best mysterious voice. How can you tell?" he asked. "Don't tell anyone?" She leaned forward and whispered, "But I'm kind of psychic." They both laugh, and Ellie caught Marcus's eye reading the band name on her shirt. "Hey, I had no idea that you were a Parallel Lunatics fan," he remarked. "That's my favorite band." "Well, I just started listening to them," Ellie replied. "Maybe you could recommend me some more of their albums?" Suddenly, the school bell sounded, interrupting their conversation with a reminder that the day had to start. Waving goodbye and heading to class, Ellie was unable to stop herself from smiling now that her way in had worked. For the rest of the week, she kept relying on the doll. Every moment she wasn't in class, she was holding it to her ear, listening to Marcus's half of every conversation. The more she did, the more she learned about him, what music he liked, where he was thinking of going to college, and what he wanted to study there. Every time she passed him in the hallway, she'd give him a smile and wave, just to remind him that she was there. It was a long game, but she hoped it would end in the way she wanted. 9 days had passed since she started using the doll, and that's when it started to become somewhat unreliable. Over the weekend, it had been moving as though Marcus was at the skate park again. But when Ellie approached him to ask how his weekend was and if he'd enjoyed going skating, he looked at her with confusion. Marcus said he'd been visiting his dad that weekend and didn't have any time to go anywhere near the skate park. But that one inaccuracy was nothing compared to what she heard the doll say next. Still using it to listen in on Marcus's conversations, the naughty stalker had started relaying words that made her heart shatter into 1,000 fragments. She overheard him talking to a friend about her, saying horrible things, like how he thought she was weird and that she had clearly listened to Parallel Lunatics just to get his attention. Worst of all was when Ellie heard Marcus say through the doll that he would never want to date a girl like her. She was heartbroken, tears streaming down her face as she hid in the toilet cubicle during lunch break. Sniffling, wiping her eyes in her baggy band t-shirt, Ellie felt her sadness turning into a wave of rising anger. Throwing the door open, she marched out of the bathroom and started searching the school for Marcus. "How could you say those things about me?" she yelled furiously when she found him sitting on the window ledge halfway up a stairwell. "Huh?" he mumbled, lifting up his headphones, instantly noticing that she seemed upset. "Hey, Ellie, are you okay?" "You're a jerk," she screamed, almost choking on sobs that threatened to come bursting out in a flood of tears. "Why were you saying horrible stuff about me?" "What are you talking about?" Marcus asked, his face looking utterly confused. "Don't play dumb. You said I thought I was weird and that you'd never date someone like me." "Whoa, Ellie, I don't know who told you that, but that's not true. I mean, I don't know you all that well, but I never say anything like..." He tried to reply. "Liar!" She cut him off with another yell. "I heard you. I was listening to every word." "What do you mean you were listening?" The confusion on Marcus's face quickly turned to concern. In his mind, he was quickly putting two and two together. The band shirt, the question about the skate park. "Have you been following me?" Instantly, Ellie felt her stomach flip, her anger partially dissipating and replaced with fear. No, it's not like that," she said, trying to ease his look of obvious alarm. I just wanted to know more about you, and now I do." "What the hell does that mean?" Marcus asked, sounding almost frightened. I know everything about you." Ellie started stepping closer, thinking if she went in for a hug that might calm them both down. "I know all your favorite music, what you like to do for fun. I wanted to know because I really like you, but I didn't know how to talk to you." Stay away from me." Instinctively, Marcus's arm, reacting to her getting too close, pushed Ellie backwards. Behind her was nothing but a sharp drop and a flight of concrete steps. With a scream, she tumbled backward, her body barreling down the stairs until her head hit the ground at the bottom of the last stair, giving a sickening crack as her neck broke. Teachers could barely hold back the students that came crowding out, trying to get a better look as the paramedics came to take Ellie away. As they lifted her body onto a stretcher, nobody noticed something fall out of her pocket. An unused naughty stalker doll. A brand new instance of SCP-693. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone who sat around the long oak table was sweating in their business suits, tugging at their ties so that it might dislodge the collective lumps in everyone's throats. At the head of the table, someone sat facing away from the rest of the gathered executives, their silk-gloved hands interlocked, the crown of a top hat just visible over the back of their broad, throne-like chair.
"So, my friends,"
they said without turning around, in a voice that filled the boardroom.
"What a sorry state of affairs this is. The SCP Foundation sticking their noses in. sniffling around the company, shutting down factories. And then there are our customers too obsessed with Fortnite to be interested in the toys we're making. If Wondertainment Enterprises can't touch the hearts of every man, woman, and child on the planet, then what are we even doing here? What is our point?
A pause lingered. Nobody in the room knew whether to answer or keep quiet and let somebody else speak first.
That wasn't a rhetorical question,
The voice yelled from its chair.
We are a company that makes toys. That is our point, and that's why you're here, so go ahead, don't be shy. Pitch me something.
After another moment of silence, one of the board members nervously stood up from his chair. Attempting to straighten his tie, he produced a box containing a prototype. I might have something, Doctor, he said, nervously struggling to compose himself.
Go on.
Opening the box, the man produced a small circular spinning top with jagged edges, or a Beyblade to those born after 1999. So, 90s nostalgia is back, in right now, the executive stammered, assembling the Beyblade in his shaking hands. And Wondertainment Enterprises can be the first to relaunch this popular playground craze from, back in the day. He pulled the ripcord, letting the spinning toy loose on the desk. Instead of spiraling in a circle, though, the Beyblade shot across the table's surface and hopped down to the floor, a tiny voice emanating from it the entire time.
No, please don't make me fight. I can't. I won't do it. I don't want to die.
It sobbed as it raced across the floor and out the door. Realizing he didn't need to say anything else, the board member sat back down. Another stood up, more eager now that somebody else had gone first.
Well, we were thinking something more for the younger market,
she declared. She produced a large flashcard that displayed an image of a pretty ordinary-looking hobby horse.
You can't really go wrong with the classic, right?
She asked, looking around the room for any looks of approval from the rest of the board.
Anyway, these hobby horses are durable. They come in a range of colors. There's just, one little caveat. We got some calls from the Italian Prime Minister after we'd been testing them. Apparently at the exact same time someone rocks on one of these hobby horses, a random person in Italy just gets turned to dust. We currently have, no way of counteracting this.
There were a few short murmurs from the rest of the board. Sensing she was losing them, the same executive signaled her assistant, who retrieved something from outside the boardroom. As she re-entered, she was holding a teddy bear at arm's length, grimacing in disgust. The rest of the board quickly realized why. The bear carried with it a pungent stench that hung heavy in the air.
Keeping with that younger market I was talking about,
the exec piped up again, holding her nose shut.
Kids love gross out humor, right? You put a fart in an animated movie and the tykes go nuts for it. So this delightful product, the Stinky Bear, can bring the same enjoyment into the home for the low price of $39.99.
Are those the same bears that R&D was testing a while back? One of the other Wondertainment executives asked.
The ones that had a 1 in 5 chance of releasing lethal amounts of Novichok? Wait, isn't that a Russian nerve agent?
Another exclaimed in horror.
Get that stinky bear out of here!
Defeated, the presenting executive retook her seat while her assistant carried the bear to the incinerator.
Well, this has been a poor show thus far,
came the good doctor's voice from the far end of the table, interrupted by a tinny electronic beeping.
Mr. Glenridge, what is that in your pocket?
Oh, sorry, feeding time. The board member, Mr. Glenridge, apologized, pulling out a tiny oval-shaped device and, oddly enough, a candy bar.
It's a Tamagotchi, you remember those, right? Well, we whipped up this one to be more intelligent, but it keeps demanding actual solid food, so I just have to,
Glenridge then proceeded to tear open the candy wrapper and began mushing it into the Tamagotchi's LCD screen. The virtual pet made a number of sad-sounding beeps, almost like it was crying over its own lack of taste buds.
I think the problem here is obvious.
A stuffier, older member of the board, Mr. Omer, spoke up.
Look, we all know that the dang kids are too distracted by their darn cell phones these days. And sure, we could sit here and try to get them interested in the anomalous entertainment we're trying to sell them. Or we could try to profit off them by going after what we know they're already obsessed with.
I really don't think you should pursue this train of thought, Mr. Omer.
An executive named McClaren interjected.
No, this is a good idea,
Omer protested.
It's simple. We develop an app, a video game that the kids won't be able to get enough of. But here's the catch. In order to progress in that game, we can encourage them to spend real cash in exchange for some kind of virtual currency that can only be used in the app. It'd be essentially worthless, useless even, anywhere other than inside our game, but if they want to be the best at it, then the kids will have to keep coughing over the dough.
And hey, we could even throw in some kernel-grade spyware too, so when they have the app on their phones, it simultaneously harvests all their personal data and...
At the snap of the doctor's gloved fingers, Mr. Omer was suddenly vaporized, letting off one final shriek as he turned into a pile of ash on the table.
I think Mr. Omer failed to realize that many other companies already beat us to the punch with that idea.
Dr. Wondertainment sighed, exasperated.
And besides, we aren't monsters. Somebody else take the floor, please.
Well, Mix Claren mumbled, standing up, wiping some of Mr. Omer's ash off their glasses. Our social media team has been doing some research into current online trends, and it turns out we might have something that fits with a really popular one. Claren produced a pristine doll's house, a 2-scale recreation of a single-story home in Albuquerque, New Mexico. They opened up the walls, revealing a group of figurines inside, each one moving of its own accord, mimicking verbal speech with a series of little noises. Lifting off the house's plastic roof, a tiny sculpted pizza slipped off the tiles.
So, we built this a while ago during the peak of the show's popularity, Claren explained. It's a doll's house. The dolls inside are somewhat alive, as you can see, but they're always acting out the plot of Breaking Bad scene by scene in broadcast order.
Sure enough, one of the dolls was a miniature bald-headed Walter White, making some little squeaks that sounded like it was saying,
I am the one who knocks.
Breaking Bad has had a major resurgence in meme culture lately, so this could be a viable product.
One of the other board members chimed in.
Right, exactly.
Claren smiled nervously.
Of course, we'd have to sort out a licensing agreement with AMC, otherwise we might get sued.
Returning to their seat, Claren trailed off, hoping someone else would step in to fill the latest bout of uncomfortable silence. Wiping a bead of sweat from his brow, a Mr. Ash took the floor, his assistant wheeling in a projector and hooking it up to a laptop. The rest of the executives couldn't hear the imaginary building drumroll in Ash's head as he walked up and began to play a video clip.
My fellow board members, he announced with a well-rehearsed beaming smile. As interesting as some of these other pitches have been, I believe I may well have something truly special to show you. Behold, the Dr. Wondertainment Zoomatron pedal car.
Through the projector, the video showed a large plastic toy car with a crash test dummy sitting in it. It gradually began building up speed at an impressive rate for an outdoor toy. The Zoomatron was whipping around an indoor testing track faster and faster until it was little more than a blur, a speeding ring of constant motion. The board could just make out the dummy's arms flailing limply thanks to the sheer G-force.
I'm almost afraid to ask. Mr. Glenridge cleared his throat and spoke up. But exactly how fast does that thing go? I'm very glad you asked, Mr. Ash replied excitedly. It can reach up to Mach 6 with just an average amount of pedals per second, or PPS if you will. But surely that's dangerous, Mix Claren queried. I mean, an object of that size moving 6 times the speed of sound that low to the ground? I won't deny there have been a few, let's call them teething problems, Ash admitted.
Almost on cue, the video showed a Wondertainment Enterprises worker stepping accidentally into the path of the speeding pedal car, only to vanish in a split second as it whizzed by. The car shot into and then through a nearby wall.
You have anything else, Mr. Ash? Dr. Wondertainment asked impatiently from their chair.
He stammered, rummaging through some papers.
In a similar vein, we also developed an electric scooter. You know, like those bird ones you see people riding around on a lot. Doesn't go quite as fast as the Zoomatron, so that could potentially be safer. Marginally. I meant to say marginally safer. What's the catch with this one?
A board member asked, their exasperation obvious in their tone.
It's probably better if I just show you.
Mr. Ash sighed. He pressed play on another testing clip wherein a Wondertainment employee stood atop their scooter. At first, it seemed to be moving normally. That is, until the camera filming it zoomed out. The employee and the scooter were floating several feet in the air.
We're still waiting for that staff member to return from their journey, he said sheepishly. I'll just sit back down. What if we made a yo-yo out of lasagna?
Mr. Glenridge asked. The rest of the board all turned to look at him confused, before he receded in his chair out of embarrassment, fiddling with his starving Tamagotchi in the hopes that the next outlandish toy idea would make everyone forget what he had just said. Luckily enough, one of the execs, Miss Stevenson, opened up her briefcase and produced a brightly colored stuffed bear.
If I might bring us back to basics, she announced, or bear six if you pardon the pun.
We won't, Dr. Wondertainment said bluntly.
Oh, well, allow me to introduce the Doesn't Care Bear. Stevenson forced a smile, then handed the bear to the nearest board member. What am I supposed to do with this? Mr. Ash asked, confused. Just press the stomach, Miss Stevenson urged, giving him a wide-eyed glare as if to say either, work with me here, or please help. Doing as instructed, Ash gave the doesn't care bear a gentle squeeze, activating a voice box somewhere inside it. Wow, Marlin, your surgeon really conned you for those hair plugs, the bear sneered cruelly. Mr. Ash instinctively reached up to his forehead, where his hairline had been noticeably receding until only a few months ago, but he'd never told anyone about his transplant. In truth, it was something he felt pretty insecure about. I don't know what it meant by that, Mr. Ash protested, playing it off with a half-hearted chuckle. Darn thing must be defective. Not as defective as your scalp, Marlin! The bear gave another callous jeer. Did you seriously think that looked realistic? Nobody's hairline is that ruler straight, not naturally anyway. Maybe if you've been a baker like your dad wanted you to, you could have avoided all the stress that made you lose your hair in the first place. Then again, you were never that good of a son to him anyway. How in the hell do you turn this awful thing off? Mr. Ash asked frantically, holding back tears. Isn't it great? Miss Stevenson said, forcing a toothy grin. Imagine how great it would be for boosting kids' confidence. By honing in on their worst insecurities? Mix Claren raised an eyebrow. Presenting them with something they don't like about themselves will challenge them to improve on it, Stevenson argued, in an unjustly condescending voice. That's just basic reverse psychology. Deborah, taking a one-day course doesn't make you a clinical psychiatrist, the doesn't care bear retorted. You know, you really aren't as smart as you want people to think you are. How about a modern update of an old classic? Mr. Jeffries, an older executive, spoke up, excitedly setting up something on the table in front of him. It was a pair of foldable playing boards, with a collection of tiny ships, each one a different size and shape. Mix Claren, if you'd be so kind, he said, passing them one half of the board game. That's just Battleship, Stevenson retorted, stuffing the abrasive bear back into her briefcase. Ah, but wait, Mr. Jeffries replied jovially, finished placing his miniature boats. Now then, give me a coordinate. B6? Claren said. Direct hit! Jeffries clapped his hands excitedly. It was then that everyone noticed a tiny streak of smoke shooting up from one of the ships on Claren's board. Glowing, it soared directly upwards, leaving a trail behind it, climbing through the air over the table. Then, once it was above Mr. Jeffries' board, the little glowing projectile began to plummet straight back down. At once, the board members all realized it was a miniature missile, some of them urgently ducking under their desks before it struck its target. A small explosion erupted on Mr. Jeffries' board, punctuated by a miniature fireball and cloud of black smoke that wafted up only to be sucked into the boardroom's air purifier. From the battleship that had just been hit with shrunken ordnance, the Wondertainment execs could hear some tiny, barely audible voices. They were screaming and shouting in a state of panic. Mayday, mayday, and abandoned ship, swim for your lives were the only words anyone could clearly decipher. Battleship Extreme Edition, Mr. Jeffries announced proudly with a chuckle, met with looks of concern from the board members brave enough to sit back down in their chairs. While we're on the topic of games, Mix Claren spoke up again, I did have this. They produced a handheld video game player, the kind that only featured one classic title. Fortunately, the particular title was Pac-Man, the distinctive music and flapping sound of the titular character's mouth instantly recognizable even to the youngest members of the Wondertainment Enterprises board. Come on, Kay, one of the executives sighed. We're all waiting to hear the catch. It's, this one's actually pretty horrible, they admitted, handing the game across the table to Mr. Glenridge. Seemingly happy to be free from the Tamagotchi's pleas for food, he began absent-mindedly playing Pac-Man. I mean, it handles well, he observed, guiding the yellow mouth flapping icon around the maze, avoiding multicolored ghosts as he chomped down on any dots in his path. It's quite a throwback, too. 80s nostalgia is still hot right now, isn't it? Ooh, power capsule! Mr. Glenridge hit the corresponding buttons to lead Pac-Man towards the larger dot, which granted him a power-up ability to eat the ghosts that were patrolling the maze. Tapping away with both thumbs, he got Pac-Man to follow in the path of one of the ghosts. Then the handheld game started screaming. Billy! Billy, please, no! Shrieked a tinny 8-bit voice. Ma? Mr. Glenridge's face went pale, drained of all color as he stared horrified at the game in his hands. Pac-Man kept following the path of the fleeing ghost, gaining on it. The closer he got, the louder the compressed screaming got. Billy, stop! Don't let him eat me, please, son! But sure enough, Pac-Man caught up with the ghost and kept up his perpetual chomping. As the ghost was eaten in the game, The built-in speaker played the blood-curdling cries of Mr. Glenridge's mother over the classic theme music. Silently, with a look of pure shock on his face, Glenridge put the game down on the desk. "So, yeah, there's that," Clarence said awkwardly. "A Pac-Man game with the souls of dead relatives trapped inside. These toys are all, well, perfectly useless, let's be honest," the good doctor erupted. "Are you forgetting we have the SCP Foundation breathing down our necks? Surely any one of these abominations would have them poking around and investigating us even more." "How about this?" one of the execs interrupted. "Picture Monopoly, but Site 19 edition. We could really get our own back on the Foundation. Expose where the anomalies are kept. Just generally cause some trouble for them." "Oh, the playing pieces could be some of the things they have in containment," another joined in. "Instead of the shoe, the car, and the iron, we might have an anomalous shoe, car, and iron. And being sent to jail in the game would turn a player into a member of their D-class personnel," the first board member replied. "Enough!" The doctor's booming voice silenced the whole room. "That is, without a doubt, one of the most absurdly stupid ideas I have heard in the history of this company." "With respect," somebody spoke up, "I think you're all overthinking this." One of the board members who had been sat at the furthest end of the table, keeping quiet throughout the rest of the farcical presentations, suddenly stood up. Adjusting his tie, he addressed his fellow Wondertainment executives. "Doctor, you'd like your company to uphold its core purpose to make toys and reach people all over the globe," he stated. "And as a healthy added bonus, you'd like to stick it to those killjoys over at the SCP Foundation too. So why don't we do something that will cover all those bases?" "That's what we've all been trying to do," Glenridge protested. "Like I said, you're overthinking it," the exec replied. "Let me show you something." Casually, he produced a stylized plush. The group leaned in, astonished to see it resembled SCP-049, better known as the Plague Doctor. "We make plushies," the board member paused for dramatic effect, "of the Foundation's SCPs." "Very intriguing," Dr. Wondertainment declared, finally turning their chair around to face forward, examining the Plague Doctor plush in their gloved hand. Anyone who types scpswag.com into their search engine of choice will find high-quality plushies of some of the SCP Foundation's most beloved anomalies. There was a tortuous pause. The members of the boardroom could barely breathe as Dr. Wondertainment rose to his feet and began to clap.
"You son of a bitch. I'm in."
Now go and check out SCP-001, A Simple Toy Maker, my favorite episode, and all the little misters explained for more of the wondrous world of Dr. Wondertainment.